This is The Other Side of Midnight with Frank Morano.
They're running a strange program, y'all.
Now, here's Frank Morano.
Well, the bad news is that 1/5 of the world is apparently lonely. The good news is the other 4/5 of you have me. That's right. I am what's keeping you company at night or in the morning or whenever you happen to listen to this show. I am here for you, and so is the venerable and incredible Dominic Carter, who we try to start each and every program with. He's a veteran broadcast journalist and a nationally syndicated radio talk show host. Hello there, Dominic.
It's nice to be with you, Frank, Mr. 4-4, as always.
Thank you, my friend. All right, I got to run this by you. You know Mike Bloomberg a long time. I remember, I think his first television interview as a mayoral candidate was with you about 23 years ago. You may even go back farther than that. And you've moderated debates that he's been in. You've covered him as a presidential candidate, as a mayor, as a mayoral candidate, you name it. And in fact, one of the first times I was ever on television with you was when I was talking about Mike Bloomberg's prospective presidential campaign as an independent. Well, Mike Bloomberg is also one of the most generous philanthropists in the world. And starting in the fall semester, paying tuition is going to be one less thing to worry about for most medical students at Johns Hopkins University. And apparently Mike Bloomberg's philanthropic organization, which donated $1 billion to cover tuition for students who come from households earning less than $300,000. So additionally, students from families who bring in less than $175,000 will also have their fees and living expenses covered. So if you earn less than 300 grand, or your family does, and you go to Johns Hopkins, thanks to Mike Bloomberg, the tuition is going to be free. Give me your reaction to this, Dominic. What do you make of this?
Doesn't surprise me at all. That's Mike Bloomberg. If you get to know him, a couple of things come to mind. So I recall several years. First of all, you offended me, Frank. You said it was 24 years ago that I interviewed Bloomberg. Are you calling me an old man?
Must have been some other guy.
I'm only joking. But to go to Johns Hopkins, and it's pronounced Johns Hopkins, correct?
That's my understanding. I never went there, but yes, Johns Hopkins.
Okay, so yeah. I went there with Bloomberg when he went back to be the graduation speaker. And it's right, I believe the campus, if I remember correctly, it's in Baltimore, right outside Baltimore. But Frank, it is one of the most beautiful campuses that I've ever seen in my life. Everywhere you walk around, it says the Bloomberg School of this, the Bloomberg School of that. The grounds are kept in a way that I've ever seen any. It's almost like a botanical gardens when you're walking around the campus. And I don't know if they're still known for this, but the university, they were known for their lacrosse team. They used to win national championships, often beating my alma mater, Syracuse University, in men's lacrosse. So to know Mike Bloomberg, before he became mayor, and he came out of nowhere, political novice, decides to run for mayor. The establishment said he couldn't win mayor of New York City. Boom, he wins. You have 9/11. You have the Democrats squabbling with each other. Bloomberg comes in. He embraces the city's first black mayor. He spends a ton of money, as you know, and I mean a ton of money in record numbers, and he's elected. Now, the reason why this is important to because you have to understand the Bloomberg story. So when he came in, I think he was worth $4 billion. When he left mayor, he was worth $20 billion, mayor of New York. I think he's now worth $100 billion.
Wow.
From his companies. And he has no problem with spreading the money around. He to talk to Mike Bloomberg, Frank, he will tell you exactly what's on his mind. So once he took a dig at me, and he was right, an early morning event, and sometimes I could lose a few pounds. And I'm sitting there eating a bagel, and he's the mayor, he's about to give a speech. And he walks past me, right? He kind of hurt. And he goes, Dominic, you really need to put that bagel down. And kept walking to go deliver the speech. But He wasn't being mean. That's Mike Bloomberg. That's just the way he is. And so, he would tell the press corps, and I'm coming back to your topic, he would fly his aircraft to Bermuda, and he wouldn't tell the media where he was going. And, he was a different type of mayor. But it doesn't surprise me at all, the money that they're raising for the medical school. Frankly, that's the way it should be. A couple of schools have done that now. And with the City College of New York, I know that Frank, the city system, back in the 50s and 60s, I believe it was back in that time period, it was free to attend anyway.
The thing that I wonder, though, isn't it kind of a shame that a lot of these great schools, if you want to go there and not be saddled with 25 years worth of student loan debt, you essentially have to rely on the generosity of a billionaire? I'm wondering if maybe our higher educational institutions, the economics of attending them, have gotten a little out of control.
They're way out of control. But when you look at faculty costs, the cost of the sports program, the cost this, the cost that, and then what's even more insulting is if you look at the endowments at some of these universities like Harvard, they have so much money, but they're not really giving it back to the students. They're building new buildings on campus. They're expanding. You shouldn't have to rely on a billionaire, but Frank, if so, let's say Carmine, your son, right now, of course, you're well on your way to making a ton of money, right?
Right.
No, I said well on your way, right? So, 15 years from now, Carmine's ready for college. I mean, if a billionaire is putting up the money, wouldn't you want it to be available for Carmine?
Well, certainly, right, certainly. But, I'm not counting on that, so we're scrolling away whatever we can in terms of savings right now. Absolutely.
And that's a good idea. A good idea.
You know what I wonder, Dominic? I mean, you've been to doctors like anybody has. We've seen the incredible amounts of money that specialists can make in the medical field when if you're just a normal primary care physician or an ER doctor or you have a specialty that's maybe not as lucrative, you don't make that kind of money. I'm wondering if this initiative is going to affect the distribution of medical specializations among students. Do you see any sort of an increase in primary care physicians or a shift towards more lucrative specialties because of this? Or will it have no effect on what kind of medicine people study?
It's already had an impact in many states. So, for example, what comes to my mind is New York. And there's a shortage of OBN doctors that deliver babies, GYN for women, and OBN because of the high insurance rates, and that they're sued quite a bit. So it's very expensive. And I know the common thought, Frank, is to say, well, when they graduate from med school, they go on to make a ton of money. Not necessarily true. To the point that you just made, it depends on what the doctor's specialty is. They've got to get through college. They've got to get through 3 years of their residency. Mm-hmm. It's a lot of money. And so a couple of billionaires in their graduation addresses have announced, with the parents sitting there, that from the class going forward, we will pay the full tuition for your child to attend medical school. It's a good thing.
Absolutely.
We need more doctors, and I just think it's wonderful. I really do.
Yeah, no, I do too. Don't get me wrong, and this is very generous. And I wish I could do it. I'd do the same thing. By the way, if people want to comment, you can join the conversation at 646-720-0635, 646-720-0635. Last question, Dominic, because unfortunately everything these days is viewed through something of a racial prism. And a lot of communities of color will not necessarily have the resources to go to a higher educational institution like Johns Hopkins without this. So I'm wondering, How do you think this donation is going to impact the diversity of the student body at Johns Hopkins? Are there specific demographics, specific communities that you think might benefit more than others?
Well, it's funny that you say that, Frank, because, and I wasn't going to go there, but there have been Hollywood movies made about Johns Hopkins history, which wasn't good.
Oh, I know. That's why I asked the question. Yeah.
Right. Which wasn't good in terms of African Americans were allowed to assist, but they weren't allowed to have major roles at the medical school. There have been Hollywood movies done about this. And so you have Bloomberg come along, and I really think that his heart is in the right place. And when you think about the fact that this man is now worth plus $100 billion, this is a drop in the bucket for him. And, he's in his late 70s?
Right. And I think he might even be 82, I think.
Yeah, I believe you're right. And I think this is his way of giving back. I know, for example, that in a lot of his initiatives, he has it not where there are quotas, but he makes sure that there are different racial groups. Generally speaking, I shouldn't say, I like the guy. I like the guy not because of his money. It's just because of who he is. And if you get to know him, he's a good guy. When it comes to billionaires, the person that we work for, Mr. John Catsimatidis, he is the most down-to-earth
that's for sure.
billionaire that I've ever met in my life. Mike Bloomberg is sort of like that, but not as far as Mr. Catsimatidis and Mrs. Catsimatidis are. As you know, Frank, you could sit down with the Catsimatidis and discuss anything, and they'll sit down and discuss it with you.
Oh, no,
like any other regular person.
No doubt about it, and how, that's for sure.
Right, and so Mike Bloomberg, you can't really do that with him.
Last question about this $1 billion donation, because we'd all like to be in the position where we could donate $1 billion to something. If you had $1 billion to donate to the medical field, would you have done this? Would you have chosen to fund tuition? Or do you think there are other areas within healthcare that might benefit more significantly from a donation like this?
If I had money like this, and it's laughable, but if I had money like this, I would probably do it in the field of journalism. I've always wanted to do a memorial scholarship in my mother-in-law's name. And she's deceased now. Her name was Ruby Stevens. And I've always wanted to do, not even with a lot of money. I've always wanted to do it with like maybe $100,000 a year. But obviously I can't afford that right now. I plan on doing it. But we do need people to step up in the medical field because here's the bottom line, Frank. If you've got the smarts to make it through medical school, money shouldn't be the obstacle to stop you.
Exactly. And
the bottom line.
And as you pointed out, it's a shame that these schools that have endowments that are so large that they could fund tuition, it really are still charging these exorbitant tuitions, in my view. All right. We'll end it there. Dominic, I will see you tomorrow, my friend.
Thank you. Have a great show. Don't keep me up all night.
No promises. If you want to comment, you can do so. 646-720-0635. Hey, we're going to talk about the Supreme Court in a minute. Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez wants to impeach two of the justices and a couple of senators who are a little bit more serious, I think. They are calling for a special counsel investigation into Clarence Thomas. And what about that presidential immunity ruling that came down last week? I have some questions about it, but we're going to go to the go-to guy when it comes to the Supreme Court. Professor at Pepperdine Law School. I wonder what their tuition situation is. Barry McDonald. He joins us straight ahead.
The Other Side of Midnight with Frank Morano.
Economists warn that massive tax hikes could devastate your IRA and 401k as the stock market braces for impact. I'm Larry Kudlow, and I urge you to fortify your savings with physical gold with my friends at Priority Gold. To learn how gold and silver can help diversify your savings, please call 1-800-405-GOLD or just visit PriorityGold.com to get a free gold information guide. That's 1-800-405-GOLD.
It's The Other Side of Midnight with Frank Morano.
This is The Other Side of Midnight. I'm Frank Morano. Boy, oh boy, is there a lot going on with the Supreme Court, and it's not even in session. Last week's decision by the court on presidential immunity was either no big deal or the most significant court case that we've seen since Bush versus Gore, depending on what experts, what media outlets you turn to. And then yesterday comes around, you have two senators asking the Attorney General to appoint a special counsel to investigate ethical violations by Justice Thomas. And wait, there's more. There's a member of Congress that's actually submitting articles of impeachment for three of the justices. So how do we wrap our heads around what the court is actually doing, where the court's going, how the public perceives the court, the relationship of the court with the rest of the government and with the rest of the country, quite frankly? Well, one of the people that I enjoy turning to in discussing the Supreme Court is Barry McDonald. He's a noted law professor at Pepperdine University, an incredible expertise in constitutional law. And whenever I've read his work in the New York Times or any other publication on the subject of the Supreme Court, I end up agreeing with whatever point he's trying to make, even if I didn't think I was going to agree when I first started reading the article. That's why I'm very grateful that he's agreed to return to the program. Barry McDonald, thanks so much for joining me on The Other Side of Midnight.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Frank.
Let me begin with asking you about this decision on presidential immunity. This is something that has been very divisive in terms of where people view this case and how significant they view the implications of this case. Give me your view on the presidential immunity case. And if people aren't familiar with it, basically the Reader's Digest version is they say the president does have immunity for official acts, but doesn't have it for non-official acts. They don't necessarily define what those official acts are. What was your take on the decision, Barry?
Yeah, I thought it was a bit unnecessary to go as far as the majority did to lay out all these complicated rules about when the president is immune or when the president isn't immune. They actually created three categories that now lower courts are going to have to look at when this comes up. So they said, well, if the president is exercising his core constitutional responsibilities, then he's absolutely immune from any prosecution once he leaves office for violating criminal law. On the other hand, if he's not exercising core constitutional responsibilities, but just sort of performing the everyday job of president, then he's entitled to presumptive immunity unless the government can show that holding the president accountable wouldn't sort of impede the functioning of the executive branch. It's a very sort of loosey-goosey standard. And then, of course, in door three, you have private acts or unofficial acts where the president enjoys no immunity. That just makes sense. You can't just violate the law even if you're the president, if you're just engaged in private conduct. But the big question here is how are lower courts going to sort of sort through all of this and figure it out? And a lot of people say process is substance. And my fear is even though presidents can theoretically still be held accountable for violating criminal law when they're performing official acts, if it lies outside of this core area. I mean, just sorting through, for lower courts to sort through all that, to, sift through the arguments of the prosecution, the defense as to what's what. And a lot of these acts, first of all, you got to decide, is it official or unofficial or private? That's a hard line to draw. Then if it's official, is it core? Is it non-core? I mean, so again, process is substance. I think it's going to be very difficult to hold former presidents accountable for violating criminal law for things they do while they were in office.
I share the same concerns, and I said so at the time of the decision. And one of the things that several listeners pointed out with this decision is, well, look, there have not exactly been a lot of presidents that have been held criminally accountable. And I think there's many violations of the law that you could point to on the part of presidents, Republican and Democrat. So I guess my question on a practical level is, keeping in mind everything that you said, does this actually change anything, or does this actually just codify what had been sort of this traditional gentleman's agreement among presidents of both parties, which is we're not going to prosecute our predecessors?
Well, I wouldn't characterize that as a gentleman's agreement. I mean, the only real sort of analog to what's happening today would be Richard Nixon, in my mind. He, I think, assumed that he could have been criminally prosecuted for the Watergate events because he accepted Gerald Ford's pardon for those events. So I think if there's a tradition in our country, it is that if you haven't done something that's heinous, for example, like you haven't killed somebody, but all you've done is broken into the headquarters of the DNC, the Democratic National Committee. At that point, I think to bring the country back together, future presidents tend to pardon their predecessors, to unify the country. But if it's something that's really serious, I don't think we do have a history or a tradition of how to deal with that. And I think that the sort of huge wall of immunity that the majority has seemingly erected here can be unwise.
Yeah. Well, like I said, I certainly agree. I just had to bring it up because a lot of folks have been asking about it. Now, the other thing that has been pretty significant is the Supreme Court case on bribery, where the court ruled 6-3 that essentially public officials can accept gratuity after they've done whatever official act, even if it looks very much like a bribe. Now, there's a lot of people in New York and New Jersey that are pretty excited about this. New York's former Lieutenant Governor Brian Benjamin is celebrating the fact that this may mean he's not going to get retried for his corruption case. Bob Menendez in New Jersey, he's on trial now for a corruption case, and some folks are saying that this Supreme Court ruling could mean if he's convicted, that case could get thrown out. What's your view on that case and what the ramifications might be for other public officials?
Yeah, well, the court basically said that this federal statute, if you read the text of the statute, it's somewhat ambiguous, but I think a very fair reading of it is that if you, with corrupt intent, accept a reward after the fact for having performed an official act, that is a form of corruption that can be prosecuted. And I think the dissent in that case spelled out that case very well. Now, it's not to say that conservatives in the majority were sort of out to lunch in the way they read the statute. But what I see is sort of a troubling trend over the last few terms of the court on the part of the conservative majority to read public corruption statutes very strictly, which have ended up making prosecutions of public officials in situations where it's pretty clear that they were acting corruptly, making it very difficult. And I think that this recent Snyder opinion is the one you're talking about, is sort of right in that trend. And I don't know why the conservatives are so concerned with reading these public corruption statutes extremely strictly. I mean, I get it that you don't want somebody criminally accused and convicted unless they have pretty fair notice of what they do is right or wrong. But, in my view, for example, in this case that you're talking about, the mayor, I believe it was in Indiana, the facts were pretty clearly showing that he was being rewarded for having steered a lot of contracts to a private contractor.
So, I mean, the lesson is, if you're a public official now and you want to engage in a corrupt bargain with a developer or some sort of a special interest, just have them give you the gold bars or the campaign contribution or the cash afterward, right?
I mean, yeah, that's the reading that they took of this particular statute. That's not to say that there couldn't be other federal corruption laws that might come into play, but this particular law has been denuded in terms of, holding people responsible for accepting gratuities after the fact. And again, I think you could have gone either way on reading the statute here. Why you would sort of side against public corruption, I just don't know.
All right. You wrote a column which I absolutely loved about 6 years ago, asking the question in the New York Times, should the Supreme Court matter so much? And there's no doubt, wherever people fall on the political spectrum, left wing, right wing, or somewhere in between, the Supreme Court matters more than ever. Every time there's a vacancy on the court, both sides get ready to fight a war. They raise boatloads of money to support or oppose a potential nominee, and a lot of rank and file Americans that are concerned about issues like gun laws, abortion, whatever, they make their choice for president based on the Supreme Court. Why did you raise that question? Should the Supreme Court matter so much? And can you answer that question for us? Where do you come down on the question of whether the Supreme Court should matter?
Where I come down is it shouldn't matter, at least if you took sort of the founders' view of the Supreme Court's role in our society. The founders gave the Supreme Court independent, lifetime tenure in order to sort of insulate them from political considerations so that they could impartially and fairly interpret and apply the law. And so to act as that umpire, calling balls and strikes that Supreme Court justices cynically talk about when in their confirmation hearings, but don't adhere to when it gets to once they get on the court. And so the founders thought that judges in a democracy who are appointed and serve for lifetime shouldn't really have any say in policymaking in a democracy. That should be the job of the people's representatives. That should be the job of the Congress. That should be the job of the president. But in terms of judges who are unaccountable to the people, that enjoy lifetime tenure, they need to stay in their lane and narrowly decide legal disputes. Well, that whole scheme has gone topsy-turvy in our modern era, where the Supreme Court regularly decides massive questions of public policy, depending upon who has 5 votes at the time on the court. And they are not accountable to the people for these decisions that should be left with the people's representatives. And so, my answer is the Supreme Court, if it were operating the way that the founders envisioned, who sits on the court wouldn't matter so much, as long as they were sort of impartially applying law to resolve a case as it comes before them. But today they act as sort of these big policymakers. They enjoy sort of wielding that power. And it's just, they claim, at least today, the conservatives claim to be originalists. But if they really sort of took a historical view or interpretation of the Supreme Court's role in our constitutional system, it would look a lot different than the way they are acting these days.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that, because as far as I'm concerned, that's exactly my view, is that the people making policy should be the people that we vote for, not judges. And, I think I'm glad you mentioned the confirmation hearings, because I think it's the most buffoonish act of nonsense in the world, where you have these incredibly brilliant people, the nominees, who have opinions on everything, who've spent the last 40 years of their life forming those opinions, going before Congress, and then pretending they don't have opinions on anything. And it's a ridiculous process. So let me ask you then, and if people are just tuning in, we're talking with Barry McDonald, law professor at Pepperdine University and an expert in constitutional law. How would we reform the Supreme Court to get it back to the role that a lot of the founders thought that it would play in American life?
Well, there are a million sort of suggestions that have been written about out there, how we can reform the Supreme Court so that it sort of goes back to its original lane in our constitutional system. So there are a lot of sort of different ways you could approach this. I think the easiest start would be to just increase the size of the court from 9 justices to, say, 15, 18. You pick a number. I think the more justices you get on the court, the better decision-making occurs and the less chance of sort of forming these voting blocks along partisan or ideological lines. It reduces. But so that's just a minor sort of fix, but it's the easiest one. I think we need to put term limits on justices. There's a big debate about whether that would require a constitutional amendment or not. My own view is that the court has interpreted other provisions of the Constitution very broadly, and in the same way, the provisions that govern the tenure of Supreme Court justices could be interpreted so that, you could place term limits on the Supreme Court without a constitutional amendment. Another good housekeeping rule that I think Congress has the constitutional authority to impose, if it had the political will to do it, is to say that the court will not hold a law unconstitutional unless you get a supermajority vote of the court to do that. So, again, there are just plenty of sort of fixes, adjustments to the court that have been proposed. The problem is that all of them require congressional action. That's not going to happen anytime soon because when the court favors the Republicans, they are opposed to any sort of court reform. When court decision-making seems to favor the Democrats, now they're opposed to any sort of reform efforts. And so we just sort of trudge along in this very unsatisfying position. So my own view is that all these sort of structural fixes may help solve the problem, but the real problem is our judicial culture in America. So I had the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of Canada visiting my class years ago, and I said, do you have the same problem on the Canadian Supreme Court that we do in terms of partisan voting blocks? And she said, no, in Canada, she said somewhat, but it's really not a big issue because judges are just expected to be impartial and nonpartisan. And if you act in a way contrary to that, you are frowned on. You are disapproved of. In our country, you have these audiences that are really sort of voting, applauding for their justice to go off in a extreme right or extreme left position. And it's just it's the judicial culture. And so I think the one fix that I think we need a president who's going to come along, flag this problem and say, okay, I'm a Democrat, I'm a Republican, yes, but I'm going to start appointing justices not based on their ideological views, not based on their party affiliation, but based on a consensus of experts that they are sort of a great legal mind, that they have a great judicial temperament, that they are going to approach cases in a fair-minded, impartial way. I think it's going to take the president who nominates these people to sort of start to change the way we think about judges in our society.
And that would be delightful. And to me, it makes no difference whether it's a Democrat or a Republican doing that, because, when the conservatives used to rail against left-wing judicial activism, whether it was on abortion or gay rights or anything like that, I thought they were exactly right. But now that it's the conservatives that are in the majority and they're exercising their own form of judicial activism on issue after issue, I find it equally objectionable because I, as a voter, want to be electing the people that make those decisions. I'd love to see some sort of judicial culture change. And unfortunately, I'm not optimistic about it anytime soon, but maybe the frustration that everyone seems to be having with many different aspects of the court will change that. All right, let me ask you about the latest news. Senators Sheldon Whitehouse and Ron Wyden have asked the Attorney General, Merrick Garland, to appoint a special counsel to investigate potential ethical or legal violations by Justice Thomas. What's your read on what Justice Thomas has engaged in? Does this cross the line of being unethical? Does it cross the line? They seem to certainly think there's a chance of being illegal. Or is this just kind of one partisan political branch of government going after another partisan political branch of government?
Well, I mean, if you read ProPublica's reporting, that part of the problem is we just have sort of media reports, but we don't have a complete and thorough factual investigation. But if the allegations are correct, I think that there's a huge problem. I mean, the allegations are that essentially that Justice Thomas accepted all these perks and gratuities and benefits from billionaire conservative donors and didn't report them and only reported them after it became public that this had happened. And I don't think it takes a rocket scientist to say that there's a problem there, especially when, you know, the federal law and judicial oaths require justices to decide cases in an impartial way. And even if their appearance of them being impartial is questioned, federal law requires them to recuse from a particular case. And so I just think we've really lost something in the federal judiciary, and particularly at the level of the Supreme Court, in terms of how a judge is expected to conduct themselves in office.
By the way, just so people know where you're coming from, and it makes no difference to me regardless. When I read your writing, I can't tell if you're someone that would be considered conservative or liberal, but some of the audience may take some of what you say differently depending on whatever perceived political biases that you have. Do you have any sort of political bent that you're open about?
Oh, I'm a registered independent. I don't have a liberal or conservative leaning. I tell my constitutional law classes all the time that's not who I am. My job is to sort of teach the students how to think about these particular issues. So when the liberals used to control the Supreme Court, and I thought that they were doing something out, that was illegitimate, I would call them out. I'm doing the same thing now with the conservatives now that they're controlling the court. So really, it's just who is steering the court, and are they steering it in the proper way?
Makes sense. Finally, sir, I'll ask you about Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez filing articles of impeachment against Justices Alito, Thomas, and claiming that there is just unchecked corruption with the two of them. What's your take on this? This has got to be just politics, right? You don't see any substantive merit to what she's saying.
Well, I mean, as far as Justice Alito, the only thing I'm aware of is, the flag flying incident and him making some conservative remarks to reporters that were perhaps inappropriate. So I don't know what any basis for that is in terms of articles of impeachment. Justice Thomas, again, we haven't had a thorough investigation of what was going on behind the scenes with a lot of these billionaire conservative donors and whether any acts could be said to violate federal or state law. We just don't know. But if indeed an investigation turns out that even a justice committed a serious crime, I think that they should be impeachable for that. But I'm not saying that Justice Thomas did that. I'm just saying that because of all the confidentiality that surrounds the court and what justices do and their reporting, that we just don't know. All we get are sort of tidbits here and there of what might have happened.
As far as the precedent for impeachment of a Supreme Court justice, am I correct in thinking that the only Supreme Court justice that was impeached was Samuel Chase back in 1805, and that he was acquitted in the Senate? Has there been anybody else that was ever impeached?
I would have to check, but I know that Justice Abe Fortas, there was some talk about it in connection with some alleged corruption that he had engaged in the late 1960s, but he resigned before that went anywhere. Justice Chase back in the early 1800s, that was a situation where on a lower court, he had engaged in a lot of sort of partisan diatribes against one of the other parties. And they also, I think I'm thinking about the right justice, but they, out of that situation where they failed to impeach him, sort of arose the tradition or custom that you can't impeach a Supreme Court justice just because of the way they decide cases, whether you think that they're conservative, liberal, et cetera. So, and I think that that's a sound sort of custom and tradition. The impeachment mechanism has its most common application to federal judges on the district court level who have engaged in illegal conduct. I don't think that if it's proven that a Supreme Court justice has engaged in illegal conduct, that they should be treated any differently from a federal district judge.
Sure. I think in the case of Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez, and I agree that Justice Thomas may have crossed an ethical line or two here, but I think to bring articles of impeachment against Alito and Thomas, to me, it just looks blatantly political. Professor Barry McDonald, I always enjoy our conversations. Thank you for taking the time. I hope we can talk again soon.
Yeah, and I want to just say that I agree with you in terms of Justice Thomas. It is premature at this point. It seems very political. We just need to, we need to do an investigation outside of the politics and get to what really happened.
Sure. Barry McDonald, Pepperdine University. If you want to comment on any portion of our conversation, please feel free to do so. You can give me a call at 646-720-0635. That is 646-720-0635. This is The Other Side of Midnight. I'm Frank Morano. Straight ahead.
The Other Side of Midnight. It's The Other Side of Midnight with Frank Morano.
Singing Oh What a Night. This is a birthday bumper music selection from our friend Tom Brodo. Tom Brodo is an interesting guy. He's started off as a listener, but he's been listening to me for years. He's been a listener of the week before. And really, we've become friends. He participated in the ping pong tournament the last 2 years. Great guy. Gave me this wonderful bottle of bourbon. Also, a really interesting book about General Sherman, which is in my stack. Just incredibly generous with both Rachel and me, he and his sweetheart, Janice. He's been a listener of the week before. He's participated in the $1,000 Minute before. He's a great guy. But technically yesterday was his birthday, but he said he's celebrating today. So we are giving him a little bit of a birthday bonus. All right, 646-720-0635 if you want to comment on any portion of my discussion with Barry McDonald. Speaking of books, I talked about those books that Tom Brodo gave me. Gary from Staten Island has been leaving increasing numbers of books on my porch or on my property, right? So if you don't know about Gary from Staten Island, I almost envy you. But He's a character, and he happens to live 2 blocks away from me. So 2 weeks ago, he leaves this book for me. He leaves 2 books, one of which I really want to read. And it always makes me nervous when Gary knows exactly the kind of books that I want to read, because look, Gary is a very intelligent guy, as you know from his calls, but he's a few aces short of a full deck, putting it politely. Right, Matt, you'd agree with that? Do you know Gary? Have you met him in person?
I haven't met him in person, but I've spoken to him on the phone several times.
That's you don't even know what you don't know him. Then it's a world of difference between an in-person Gary interaction and one by phone. You know what the big difference is? You can hang up the phone, but you can't get away in person. Anyway, so a week or so ago, or 2 weeks ago maybe, he leaves me 2 interesting books. One I didn't have strong feelings about. The other book I really want to read. And that always makes me nervous because I could see myself ending up where Gary is, you know, going from being a kind of urbane, sophisticated gadfly who comments on public affairs and goes to all the local hearings and testifies to all of a sudden I'm shouting in the middle of the street at anybody who will listen, holding a handmade sign. So at least caused me to rethink my position. But all right, I take the book and I put it in my stack of books, which is ever growing. But I can't figure out why there's some water damage on it, like, which is really annoying when it comes to a book because the pages kind of stick. All right. So then 2 or 3 days later, he leaves me another book, a book that I really want to read. So yesterday or the day before, he leaves, my wife reports to me, a whole bunch of books on the lawn. My wife says they were in abysmal condition. They looked water damaged. They looked filthy. They looked decrepit. She said, I wouldn't be surprised if they have bugs. I'm not bringing them into this house. I just threw them away. And she asked me, she said, those other books that he gave you, including the ones that you liked, you got to throw them away. Because I don't know what's in there. There could be all sorts of weird stuff in there, including bugs. Don't bring them in the house. So it killed me to do it. But yesterday or today, I guess technically, when we're putting out the trash, we put out some of these books, including the ones that I really want to read. So no one should send me any books unless they're really, really good books. But if you do send me a book, please make sure that they're not filthy and disintegrated and look like they have bugs. So that's what we're dealing with. 646-720-0635. Let me begin with Alex. Hey, Alex, what's on your mind?
You're saying that Gary's a bit crazy, and I don't think that's the smartest thing to say unless you know he's 100% harmless. Because the guy lives, you said, 2 blocks away from you, and he knows where you live, and he might be listening right now. So I think you insulted him. And I think you got to be careful, maybe, unless you think the guy wouldn't know how to kill someone or do anything bad to anybody.
Well, I appreciate the advice, Alex. Thank you.
Okay. Well, I also, about that conversation with the professor, I wanted to ask him because he's an expert, but maybe you would know, as it pertains to official acts with this immunity case, because the court said there's a difference between core constitutional responsibilities that the president has with official acts and other official acts. Do you know of any specifics for what would be a core constitutional responsibility and what would just be a official act that has presumptive immunity?
Yeah, I don't. And I didn't read the full opinion. I did read Justice Amy Coney Barrett's concurring opinion. And she said she seemed to cast a much narrower view of what official acts were than what the other majority justices said. For instance, she said that putting a fake slate of electors up would not be an official act. She seemed to, qualify the actions that a presidential candidate might take as being different than what a president would do. But I don't. It's a good question, Alex. I wish I had a better answer for you. I'm sorry I don't. Larry's in Brooklyn. Hello, Larry.
Yeah, hi, Frank. I won't mention John Gotti in this comment. Well, listen, I have 2 things to say. First of all, Supreme Court judges do not make policy. I don't know what this professor is talking about. If the only time they make public policy is if they're so partisan that they're not interpreting the Constitution.
I mean, Larry, that's just not true. It's just not true. I mean, the Citizens United decision, even if you agree with it, that made policy. You know, the Keogh versus New Canaan case on eminent domain, that made policy. They do make policy. The striking down the gun law case in New York, it made policy. It does. Keep asking questions.
This is The Other Side of Midnight with Frank Morano.
They're running a strange program, y'all.
Now, here's Frank Morano.
I largely try to keep the show non-political because there are so many other talk shows that cover politics that I really feel like people could use some other options and a little bit of a break. And there's so many things, and I'd really like to bring the country together on cultural issues, on pop cultural issues, entertainment, other sorts of issues, rather than focus on the divisiveness of politics. However, when there's a political story that catches my attention, I am happy to share it with you. And this weekend, the Republican Party released its campaign platform. This is the first time the party released a party platform since 2016. Now, just to give you, not that my politics make the difference of a hill of beans, but I've never been a Republican. And a good portion of the reason that I've never been a Republican is because I think on social issues, the party is not at all where I am on most social issues. Obviously, when it comes to social issues, the question really has changed with this era of wokeness and everything that we're in now. So I don't even know what a social issue is these days. But historically, the party really has not been where I am. Additionally, on economic issues, I am not at all for that, George W. Bush style economic philosophy of wars and tax cuts. Not for me. I mean, I'd take a tax cut over a tax increase any day of the week, but I like being a deficit hawk. One of the things I found so appealing about Ross Perot's candidacy. And honestly, the addiction that both parties have had over the last 35 years to free trade and these reckless free trade agreements is just anathema to everything that I believe in. And it's kind of a big part of the reason that I fell so hard for Trump in 2016 as a candidate. Now, as a president, he was a little bit different. But as a candidate, he was speaking my language on really just about every issue. Trade, war, didn't get crazy in terms of what bathroom people wanted to use, didn't get crazy if two gay people wanted to get married. This was my kind of Republican. And my hope was that the Republican Party would move into a more Trumpian direction. And after looking at this platform, it really has. This document, titled 2024 GOP Platform Make America Great Again, I read through it. It includes 20 promises and 10 chapters outlining the governing priorities for a Republican president. Typically, the Republican and Democratic parties release their platforms ahead of their national conventions, and this year's release precedes the GOP National Convention in Milwaukee, which starts on July 15th, just a few days from now. So the platform's 10 chapters focus on inflation, the border, economic prosperity, the American dream, manufacturing, protecting seniors, schools, common sense governance, constitutional government, and peace through strength. Additionally, the 20 promises listed in the preamble address some specific positions like eliminating taxes on tips, keeping the dollar as the world reserve currency, and building a U.S. missile defense system similar to what Israel has with the Iron Dome. In 2020, the Republican Party didn't even publish a platform document, which was a big break from what they had done every 4 years and was a big source of criticism. Like the last GOP platform 8 years ago, this year's version focuses on some, longstanding conservative priorities of energy independence, foreign policy centered on strength, things like that. But I have to tell you, after reading this, it differs significantly in a few key areas. The 16-page 2024 platform is much less detailed than its predecessors. This is 16 pages. In 2016, it was 66 pages. In 1980, it was 75 pages. The thing that is most interesting about this, though, is the party's stance on abortion, which has changed from calls for federal restrictions on abortion or a national abortion ban to a focus on letting states decide. This is the most moderate GOP platform on abortion that we've seen in decades. This is the title of the portion on abortion. Republicans will protect and defend a vote of the people from within the states on the issue of life. See, in years past, it would always say something like, we will protect the rights of the unborn. It doesn't say that anymore. It says Republicans will protect and defend a vote of the people from within the states on the issue of life. Very much a movement towards states' rights. It also outlined the party's opposition to late-term abortion and its support for access to both in vitro fertilization and to birth control. I have to tell you, the stance of some social conservatives, like Republican Congressman Matt Rosendale, who is taking this anti-IVF issue and just going crazy with it. He's putting anti-IVF posters outside of his office in Congress. And even the Pope has come out strongly against IVF. I don't support that at all, meaning the opposition to IVF. I have a lot of friends that have, and family actually, that have gone through the IVF process to conceive, and they have wonderful children and wonderful families because of it. I really don't understand why anyone would want to deny any family the opportunity to create life this way. And I am glad to see that this GOP platform supports IVF. I think it's an important thing. So as soon as it was published, many Republicans began touting this new agenda. On his social media website, Truth Social, former President Trump expressed his support, writing, "Ours is a forward-looking agenda with strong promises that will accomplish very quickly when we win the White House and Republican majorities in the House and the Senate. We are, quite simply, the party of common sense." However, some Republicans were dismayed by both the process of how this platform came to be, as well as the platform's new position on abortion. Gail Ruzicka, a Republican National Committee member from Utah and the president of the conservative lobbying group Utah Eagle Forum, she said, "They rolled us. That's what they did. I've never seen this happen before. I don't understand why they did it, and I'm extremely disappointed that we do not have any pro-life language." And I'd love to ask you, I'll tell you what I don't want to do. I do not want to get into a discussion or a debate about whether abortion should be legal or not. I'm not doing that right now. It's death to radio. What I would like to know, if you're a social conservative and you're pro-life, how do you feel about this? Because I could see it both ways, right? If you're a pro-life conservative that views Donald Trump as a guy that did the right thing in terms of appointing justices to the Supreme Court and things of that nature, I could see you being happy because if the Republican Party takes this stance in its platform, it's more likely that they're going to win elections because the party's stance on abortion has cost it the last 3 election cycles. So I could also see you being unhappy with it because, after all, maybe part of the reason you're a Republican is because you want abortion to be illegal. You're pro-life. So I'd love to know how you feel about this. 646-720-0635. That's 646-720-0635. Now, the right, for the most part, supports this platform, even with some criticizing the moderated language on abortion. The left is very critical of the platform, basically calling it a laundry list of Trump priorities. And they're saying that the Republican agenda is out of step with what most Americans want. And a lot of people, and I think honestly, this is kind of a valid criticism. Others are saying that the moderated, the newly moderated language on abortion is a facade, that it's not real. Like they're just saying this to win over swing voters when they're just going to govern in a very reactionary way and just continue to appoint more anti-abortion justices. I think, it's interesting because this platform is more Trumpian than ever. It's really even written in his voice. I think there's a lot of good in this. There's also a lot of bombast in here, which is not surprising given, how Trump communicates. But a lot of the focus has been on abortion. I'll tell you, the only person I've seen bring this up is Isaac Saul, who's been a guest on this show in the Tangle newsletter. One of the other takeaways to me is how similar the Democratic and Republican platforms are becoming. And, it's really interesting, given how divided Republicans and Democrats are at this point, how similar certain priorities are in each of their platform documents. So the platform lays out 20 promises and 10 chapters about those promises. And, you got seal the border and stop the migrant invasion, carry out the largest deportation in American history, end inflation, make America affordable again, make America the dominant energy producer in the world by far, stop outsourcing and turn the U.S. into a manufacturing superpower, large tax cuts for workers and no tax on tips, defend our Constitution, our Bill of Rights, our fundamental freedoms, including freedom of speech, freedom of religion, the right to keep and bear arms, prevent World War III, restore peace in Europe and in the Middle East, and build a great Iron Dome missile defense shield over our entire country, all made in America. End the weaponization of government against the American people. Stop the migrant crime epidemic. Demolish the foreign drug cartels. I'm not gonna read all 20 of these because and there's a lot here. But all of these promises are very Trumpian. Big, bold ideas that in a lot of cases are widely supported by the vast majority of Americans. For instance, anybody that doesn't want a secure border? Of course not. But a lot of them are obviously pretty vague. And in some cases, they're really just not realistic at all. And they're very strongman in their attitude, like promising to punish protesters or conduct the largest mass deportation in history. So other elements of this platform, though, sound exactly like Democratic Party priorities. Most notable is the shift on abortion, which a lot of writers have covered, right? The platform explicitly supports birth control and IVF and abandons a call for federal abortion restrictions. But it also calls for increasing housing affordability by streamlining permits for new construction, making affordable education more available, and saving the American auto industry. The economist Noah Smith called those positions, and I think he's right, very Clintonian. And the platform obviously has its issues, but in one sense, I think it's great that there's so much bipartisan consensus on things like boosting energy supply or expanding the child tax credit, which Biden and the congressional Democrats tried to do, but they were actually stopped by the Republicans. It's interesting to see that in this platform. Increasing educational opportunities outside of traditional four-year colleges. We talk about that all the time with the opportunities for trade schools. But it's also a little frustrating because if Republicans and Democrats really do have the same ideas to address these same big issues, they can act on them now. We don't need to wait until the next president's elected. If they really do buy all this stuff, let's start passing legislation. But on paper, if not in reality, Republicans and Democrats are getting closer on a lot of major issues the country is facing. Abortion, we mentioned, but energy, education, housing, trade. And I think it's interesting. I happen to support a lot of these positions. So I'm actually pleased to see that they're moderating on a lot of these, both parties. And I'm happy to see, by the same token, the Democrats becoming more Trumpian on issues like tariffs, right? So I do like that. Now, so I tweeted about this earlier. And I said, regardless of what you think of Donald Trump, because I'm not, so I'm not planning to vote for President Trump this year. But I said, irrespective of how you feel about President Trump, I think this kind of platform is a huge step in the right direction. I think the changes they have made are exactly the sort of changes that should have been made years ago and might appeal to moderates. So enter Debbie Schlussel. Debbie Schlussel jumps on this tweet and says, does Amber Rose appeal to moderates? And here's a little confession. Prior to 3 days ago, I had no idea who Amber Rose was. But apparently she's one of many pop cultural figures who's very famous that I should know. And I just have no idea who she is. Apparently she used to date Kanye West. And, oh, by the way, Debbie Schlussel in this tweet of hers, and you can see it on my Twitter, at Frank Morano, Frank Morano, includes a topless photo of Debbie Schlussel that she, that's a posed topless photo, because I guess this is the kind of thing she does. She poses in topless photos. So she rose to fame after dating Kanye West. And she is now supporting President Trump. She released a video in which she said, well, I'll play you a clip of the video, but she is, I don't even know 100% what she is, why she's famous. I don't know if she's a model or an adult film actress or a hip hop star. I really am not clear on what she's famous for other than having dated Kanye West. Matt Blaze, do you know anything about Amber Rose?
Yeah, she was a model before Kanye West, and then she's dated Kanye and other rap figures and other celebrities. She was more like, I would say, a D-list, maybe E-list type of celebrity. I wouldn't say she's very famous. Most people probably don't know who she is, but I have to correct you. You said Debbie Schlussel posting topless photos.
Yes, Debbie Schlussel posted the topless photo of Amber Rose.
Oh, but the way it sounded like what Debbie Schlussel was posting.
No.
Topless photo.
Please. So I'd love to see a topless photo of Debbie Schlussel. No, she posted a topless photo of Amber Rose asking the question, does Amber Rose appeal to moderates? And I said, I didn't think so, but I must admit, I do find this photo pretty appealing. And, she went to town on that. She clearly disagrees, right? She doesn't like Amber Rose, doesn't like Kanye West, doesn't like Donald Trump. And, I understand it. But here's a little bit of Amber Rose telling TMZ that she's no longer brainwashed on political issues.
So it seems like a lot of celebrities are kind of like voting for Trump now. I mean, why do you think people are kind of like changing their way of like...
I think we just did our research and we're just, we're not brainwashed anymore by the left. I can say that about myself. All these years I've been brainwashed and I'm not anymore.
So Amber Rose is a former stripper who has fiercely criticized President Trump in the past. She's speaking at the convention in Milwaukee. Born in Philadelphia, and as Matt alluded to, and Tony, if you know anything about Amber Rose and you want to add your 2 cents, please come in and offer it. She gained fame in 2008 after she appeared in the music video for rapper Young Jeezy's single Put On, and then she began dating Kanye West. In 2013, she married another rapper, Wiz Khalifa, and had a son by him before filing for divorce the following year. She's also the author of the book, How to Be a Bad B-Word. She has modeled for Louis Vuitton, and she founded the LA chapter of the Slut Walk Feminist Protest March. So just as I have a question, there's some conservatives that are not happy that Amber Rose, of all the speakers that could speak, is speaking at the Republican convention in Milwaukee. But just as I have the question for social conservatives, how you feel about the party moderating its stance on abortion, I'd love to know, how do you feel about someone that was famous for being a stripper and dating an anti-Semitic rap star being featured so prominently in the convention? Let me know, because clearly Debbie's not happy, but she's not a Trump person anyway. 646-720-0635, 646-720-0635. As I indicated, before her recent endorsement, she'd been an opponent of Trump, calling him a, quote, effing idiot in an interview in 2016, and saying that she really hopes he's not president. So is this in some ways just kind of being the big tent party and having a tent that's big enough for Amber Rose? Or is this, kind of doing whatever it takes to appeal to what you think black voters want and relate to? Because, love Trump or hate him, he is doing a lot better with black voters than he did 4 years ago. That's a fact. And I imagine unless Kamala Harris or Wes Moore is the nominee for president, he'll going to continue to put up pretty good numbers with black voters. Tony, you are our resident expert in being black. Give me your view of Amber Rose, and did you know who she was, first of all?
Yeah, I know who Amber Rose is. She dated Kanye West, and she was an aspiring rapper and actress, and she was also a stripper from Philadelphia.
Right, and so, do people care that she's backing Donald Trump?
No, she's not relevant.
She's not relevant.
Yeah, she's not relevant. She hasn't been relevant in years.
Even when she was relevant, she wasn't really relevant.
Yeah. So is this kind of, do you think that maybe this is on her part a way to grab relevance?
Yeah, just to grab attention, to bring herself in the forefront.
All right. So this doesn't have much of an effect as far as you're concerned.
No.
All right. Well, so be it. Anything else we need to know about Amber Rose?
No, she has a tattoo over her forehead.
I saw that. I think it's disgusting. I hate that. Tattoo. Faces should not be tattooed.
One of my, as you could tell, I have 7 tattoos on my body, and my tattoo artist says he will not put a tattoo on anyone's face. Look, when I got these tattoos, I knew that they were going to be on for me for the rest of my life. Putting them on your face, that's stupid.
It's but aside from that, and maybe I've gotten kind of used to the Mike Tyson tribal tattoo. That's grown on me. But aside from that, it's just incredibly unattractive.
Yeah, thank you. It is.
Terrible.
Yes.
So there you go.
Okay.
It's a different party these days, not only in terms of a platform, but it's difficult for us to imagine how 20 years ago we would have seen someone with a former stripper with a tattoo on their face speaking at the Republican National Convention, right? I mean, maybe it's a good thing for the Republicans. Maybe, they've lost the Stormy Daniels vote. They've lost the vote of the adult film star community. Maybe this is their way of getting back, I don't know, the stripper vote. What do you think? 646-720-0635. Jacqueline in Brooklyn. I know you're a social conservative. What do you make of all this?
Well, my opinion, first of all, I am anti-abortion. I'm against abortion.
Sure, I know.
And when it comes to in vitro, maybe a lot of people don't realize this. I didn't realize this myself. I never really thought about it. All I thought about was preserving my ability to, at some point in the future, have a child when I was my body was no longer able to do it naturally. So I myself even went for freezing my eggs, and then I didn't do it. But what a lot of people don't realize is you are not only creating life, but you are also killing life at the same time, because oftentimes you have multiple eggs that are fertilized. Those are the most viable eggs, the ones that are fertilized. So you've created life. So you decide you're going to have one child, two children, three, however many children you're going to have, and then the rest of them just wind up being garbage.
Understood. So I can understand then why you and the Pope might be against IVF. So if that's your view, what do you make of the GOP stating so strongly in their platform that they're for IVF?
Well, I think they're trying to, as you said before, as you pointed out before, the Democrats and the Republicans, the gap is narrowing now. And I think the Republicans realize that in order to stay viable, they have to kind of conform to what the general majority of the public wants. I don't agree with what they're doing, but I think they're making a practical decision as far as, staying alive.
Right. I think you might be right, Jacqueline. I think this is purely a political decision. I mean, thank you for the call. In political science, one of the first things you learn about political parties is that they exist to win elections. And I think the GOP, in moderating, at least publicly, is trying to win this election. Right. I think that's it. 646-720-0635. David, what do you think?
Yeah, good morning. Okay, this is window dressing. It's designed to make people forget about Project 2025, which is the real Republican agenda. They haven't changed their position on IVF or birth control or abortion. This is a smokescreen to fool people like you who apparently have been taken in by this. You can listen to these congressmen that have been talking about banning women from traveling from state to state and all this other stuff. They haven't changed their position. This is Donald Trump willing to say or do anything to get back into the White House. Once the Republicans have control of both houses of Congress and the presidency, then they can do whatever they really want to do and pass all these restrictive laws that were in their previous platforms. I'm seriously hoping that most people are not being fooled by this. If you want to know what the real Republican agenda is, read Project 2025 and don't pay attention to this watered down
David, Trump has repudiated that Project 2025 agenda.
No. Listen. That is one of the biggest piles of horse pucky that there is.
Right, but understand what you're saying, David. You're saying basically you ignore what the party claims that it stands for and ignore what Trump says he's against.
No. Listen to what the politicians in the Republican Party have been saying up until this week, okay, Frank? And you know for a fact that all those people involved in Project 2025 and the Heritage Foundation, many of them have worked for Trump. Trump is very familiar with these people. He's promised to bring some of them into his next administration. This notion that these policies are not going to be enacted by him, that's laughable. And I'm surprised that you've been fooled by this, if you really have.
Well, I wouldn't say I've been fooled, right? I just think it's a step in the right direction on a lot of these issues.
Listen, if they want to win the election, you're right. But if you really believe this stuff, you can't be that naive. They've been pushing these policies for decades. They're not going to just suddenly change their mind in one election. This is all about winning the election.
All right. Well, you might be right, right? I mean, you might be right. I mean, they got to have, well, they don't have to have a platform, but platforms is supposed to be a statement of what people believe in. And this is their statement to the public. So you could disbelieve it, as many people do. But I think, this is what, at least in part, you have to judge them on, right? They made the decision in years past to put a bunch of conservative stuff in that platform, presumably because a lot of them believed it, but also presumably because they thought it would win them votes. Now they're putting a lot of moderate stuff in here because they think that'll win them votes.
Yeah, Frank, but how are they really going to govern? And one last thing, because this is something that you should object to. This talk of a missile shield and peace through strength, you know what that means. You constantly rail against the military-industrial complex.
Yeah, I'm not voting for him. I'm not voting for him regardless. I mean, I think, and thanks, David, I think the people that he appointed to all the important positions in government over his 4 years, I mean, those are not the kind of people that I think should have any place in governing, for the most part, a couple of exceptions. And, the other thing that was frustrating to me about this platform is, do you know how many times the word debt appears in this GOP platform? Zero. The number of times the word debt appeared in the 2016 platform, 12. So the Republicans are not even pretending to care about debts or deficits anymore. Pretty soon, just the debt service that we spend on the debt is going to dwarf spending on everything else except the military, which is a pretty frightening thing. And yet we really don't see anything from the Democrats or the Republicans on this. All right. Comment if you like, 646-720-0635. This is The Other Side of Midnight. Straight ahead.
The Other Side of Midnight with Frank Morano. It's The Other Side of Midnight with Frank Morano.
A man walks down the street, he says, why am I soft in the middle now? Why am I soft in the middle? The rest of my life is so hard. I need a photo opportunity. I want a shot at redemption. Don't want to end up a cartoon in a cartoon graveyard. Bone digger, dogs in the moonlight. Far away, my well-lit door. Mr. Beer Melly, Beer Melly.
You can call me Al. This is another birthday bumper music selection by Tom Brodo, who some people believe looks like Harold Ramis. Other people believe looks like the most interesting man in the world. You judge for yourself. This is, of course, a Paul Simon classic. I'll never forget when George Pataki was running for governor in 94 in New York State, obviously. The Democrats were trying to portray him as just being a puppet of Al D'Amato. And they played this song in a series of commercials, basically just saying that he was D'Amato and you could call me Al. I thought it was pretty clever. Clearly not clever enough to win him the election, but clever enough. And I don't know if you ever saw the music video for this, but that is also really clever. Matt, have you seen the music video for this?
Yeah, this is one of the greatest music videos of all time.
And it's so simple. It's really just Chevy Chase dancing and hanging out. And this was when Chevy Chase was Chevy Chase. And it's really, really a terrific video. I don't know what the deal is with Chevy Chase. Does he have some sort of health issue as far as you're aware, Matt?
Not that I know of. I just know that he was not very well liked in Hollywood at all.
I have heard
he's a big jerk.
Yeah, that's exactly what I've heard about it. And I don't even think he runs away from that anymore. And he just, the few times that I've seen him recently, he has not looked good. He almost looks like, and I'm not trying to be anything but descriptive here, he looks like a less vigorous version of Dick Cheney. That's exactly what he looks like. So I'm a fan of his work, by the way. My wife and I just watched all the Fletch movies, including the recent one with John Hamm. I love the Vacation movies, loved him on Saturday Night Live, Caddyshack. I mean, you name it. If there's a Chevy Chase film. I even liked Cops and Robertsons, which nobody liked. Love all his stuff. But I did hear, when I did the series of live events with William Shatner, I did hear from the people that run that company. I asked about the different celebrities that they've worked with and who was really nice to deal with, who was not so nice. They said that Chevy Chase was not nice at all to deal with, and was kind of a jerk, which didn't really surprise me, honestly, because you hear sometimes you hear a celebrity is super nice, sometimes you hear they're not so nice. Sometimes a guy like Tony Danza, I have never met a human being in my life that has said Tony Danza wasn't nice. I mean, never in decades of knowing human beings. And I've never, ever heard anybody say that he was anything but kind in every circumstance. With Chevy Chase, it's the exact opposite. I've never heard anybody say a nice thing about him. So That's neither here nor there. Hey, I want to give a shout out to my wife who is driving to the airport, even though she's working today, to go pick up her brother, my brother-in-law David, and his family who are coming in from California. So she said she's so glad she tuned in just in time to hear someone screaming about Project 2025, which is not her speed at all. We'll get to your calls in a sec, 646-720-0635. But yeah, we got a busy weekend coming up. On Friday, I am actually going to try and be at Tony Lobianco's funeral. I think it's at St. Pat's actually in the morning. And then I'm going to take the train out to Queens, and my wife will pick me up on the way to Eastern Long Island, where we're going to spend the day because her brother's in town. And then Saturday, I'm going to another funeral. Actually, it's a celebration of life. The funeral is Friday night, but because I'm out on Long Island, I'm going to another funeral for my friend's mom, who on Saturday at the celebration of life, because she'd been sick for a while, unfortunately, and it's not a surprise. But I was quite fond of his mom. She was actually also she was a school lunch aide back when I went to school as well. So I actually knew his mom even before I knew my friend, but it's a close friend. So I'm going to do that Saturday morning. And then we have plans, weather permitting, to go see the New York Mets, who I have to tell you, they have become an exciting team to watch this year. I am loving what I am seeing from the New York Metropolitans. They have a winning record. A month or two ago, I don't know that you could have said that they were going to have a winning record. So it's very, very exciting that they're getting hot just around the right time. So we'll see. I mean, still a long ways away from catching the Phillies, but you know, they're learning they're knowing how to play baseball again. Last week, we went to my dad's on Sunday, and you know, because it was going to be the last day that I saw my brother and his longtime companion before they left for Europe. So we went there, spent the day there, and it was fun. I talked about some of the experiences we had. But honestly, when I do something on a Sunday that involves something other than being home and working and maybe going to church, it takes me 3 days to recover, because I have to then cram to get the work that's necessary in for the show. And I have to try and squeeze in some sleep, and my whole schedule is thrown off. It's already tough on Sunday because you transition from a normal schedule to a nocturnal schedule anyway, but then to add having to be somewhere, anywhere. And I said, after last Sunday, I told my wife and anybody else who would listen, I said, I am done. I am done going to events on Sundays. I'm not going to anything anymore on Sundays. Done. And it's my sister-in-law's birthday party on Sunday. Not going. A lot of my in-laws are going to Six Flags Great Adventure on Sunday. Not going. Can't do it.
How dare you?
So I had forgotten that a close friend of mine for 25 years reached out to me and said, she moved to Florida, like most New Yorkers. She moved to Florida. She said she's coming to New York and she's appearing in a play. And there's 3 showings of this play. One was yesterday, which obviously I couldn't make. The next is Friday, which I can't make because I'm going to be at funerals and on Long Island. And then the next is Sunday. Now, the only conceivable day that I could go to this is Sunday. Now, I really don't want to go to this, I'll be honest. But this is a close friend, and she was at our wedding, and somebody I have known forever. She would give me such a hard time if this play showed 3 times upon her return to New York, and I couldn't make the time to see one of these showings.
Jesus, Frank.
So I'm in the midst of a quandary here of how to handle this. Do I suck it up and go to this play on Sunday, or do I maintain my ban, which is all of 5 days old, of not doing anything on Sundays? That's kind of that's what I'm dealing with. But we'll see. Unlike a baseball game, there's no chance that a play could be rained out. So this play's happening. That's where I am. 646-720-0635. If you want to comment, 646-720-0635. You know what I could do? I'm wondering, maybe I can get a stand-in to attend the play, and then I just show up at the very end and greet May backstage. I get the Cliff Notes version on what the play was, and then I will go and greet her. May, that was great. That was terrific. That would save me some time. If you're interested in being the stand-in for that play, let me know. Email me, frank.morano@redappleaudionetworks.com. Ed, what is on your mind, my friend?
Hey, Frank. I just wanted to say, in relation to a previous call that was comparing IVF to abortion, I think it's ludicrous to compare the two. I think with IVF, the people that have IVF, including myself with 3 children, we have a true desire to have the children.
Right. That's why I view it as such a difference.
Right. And the odds, unfortunately, the odds are better when you have more embryos, implanted, and you get better results. So that's why oftentimes there are embryos that don't make it. But, obviously an abortion is a different story. You can agree or disagree, but I think you got to be able to separate.
Look, Mike Pence, people can love him or hate him, but he's one of the most socially conservative guys there is, including on the issue of abortion, and governed that way, voted that way, and his children were all born via IVF, as I understand it. So I really do think there's a tremendous difference between IVF and abortion. I don't even think it's comparable, honestly. I think I understand what Jacqueline is saying. I'm not belittling at all what she was saying. And, it's an issue of conscience for her, clearly. But I personally, I don't view it as even in the same ballpark.
Yep. Thank you.
Thanks, Ed. Appreciate it. Congratulations on those 3 children. 646-720-0635. George Washington, an amazing discovery involving him. And is it possible that we're still making discoveries about the Battle of Bunker Hill and the shot heard around the world? Answer, yes. I'll tell you about it straight ahead.
The Other Side of Midnight. It's The Other Side of Midnight with Frank Morano.
Raspberry Beret by the artist formerly known as Prince. This is a bumper music selection from our listener of the week, Michael Scott Cutler, and a great selection it is. All right. We all remember from history class the shot heard around the world, the battles of Lexington and Concord. I think I said I said Bunker Hill before, but Lexington and Concord is where the Revolutionary War began, as anybody that watched 1776 last weekend knows. And now, I think this is really cool. And my Uncle Steve, if he's listening, would just love this. The National Park Service has announced that they have found 5 musket balls on the site at the Revolutionary War's opening event, the Lexington and Concord battleground. Almost 250 years ago, British soldiers marched in search of military supplies stockpiled by colonial rebels in Massachusetts, and tension turned to bloodshed with the battles at the towns of Lexington and Concord that began the Revolutionary War. The fighting in Concord was, of course, immortalized by Ralph Waldo Emerson. He's the one that coined that term, the shot heard around the world. Well, National Park Service archaeologists recently found 5 musket balls fired that day by colonial militia members. That's the word from a news release from the federal agency. I think this is way cool. Jared Fuis, a ranger at the Minuteman National Historical Park, said, quote, "It's incredible that we can stand here and hold what amounts to just a few seconds of history that changed the world almost 250 years ago. These musket balls," this is what Jared Fuis is saying, "these musket balls can be considered collectively as the shot heard round the world. And it's incredible that they've survived this long." Yeah, I really think it is. I think this is really interesting. All right, 646-720-0635. Liz is in Florida. Hi, Liz.
Hi, Frank.
Hi.
You need to be cloned. But, you have to take care of yourself, and it's also really important that you do the right thing. So if you don't go to these events, just write a nice letter and explain how hard it is at this time. They really should understand.
Well, I do that, right? Because there's a lot of stuff that I don't end up, I'm not able to always go to. And I always try to, do the right thing somehow, especially if I have to miss a wedding or something. But I still end up feeling bad for not attending. But yeah, I would like a clone. Thank you, Liz. My wife's listening to the radio booing the fact that there could be a second Frank Morano running around somewhere. So I don't think a clone is in the offing anytime soon. Hey, speaking of the Revolutionary War, as we learned from Lindsay Chervinsky, one of the people that played a pretty pivotal role in that conflict was none other than George Washington. Here is another one of these stories that I just love. An artifact that originally belonged to George Washington recently landed into the hands of a Virginia history enthusiast and then a museum, all thanks to goodwill. This is why I'm always saying we can't throw anything away. The piece is currently on display in the Museum of the American Revolution in Philadelphia. Collector Richard Dana Moore stumbled across the artifact, which is a 6-inch long piece of linen fabric from Washington's dining marquee, or, his tent. And he came upon it on Goodwill's auction site. The fabric was auctioned off with a note that read, quote, "A piece of George Washington's tent from the History Building at Jamestown, Exposition 1907, property of John Burns, December 23rd, 07. So while most of Moore's collection is made up of Civil War artifacts, he's got some Revolutionary War stuff as well. How cool is that? That this guy bought this fabric from George Washington's tent from an auction site for $1,300. I think that is awesome. Awesome. Talk about holding history in your hand. I think that's great. Catherine is in New Jersey. Hi, Catherine. Catherine. Norman is in Brooklyn. Hello, Norman.
Hey, Frank. Frank, you were talking about this battlefield where somebody left like 5 musket balls, but where they found 5 musket balls attributed to the shot heard around the world. I can just tell you that I collect antique military, and I've been doing so since I'm 14 years old. Civil War, World War II. Anyway, I have known over the years people that go, this is completely unethical, that go to battlefields, in which case I know somebody who went near Gettysburg and would put, they called it seeding the battlefield. they would like to fool the tourists and the newspapers by putting, musket balls and things like that on the ground so that tourists go, oh, my God, this came from the battle. And so I can't see how these forensic department people.
I have to end it there. Thank you. I just because of the interest of time. I agree it's hard to believe, but I can't see these archaeologists being fooled by what you're describing. I don't think so. Help control the pet population. Get your dog or cat spayed or neutered.
This is The Other Side of Midnight with Frank Morano.
They're running a strange program, y'all.
Now, here's Frank Morano.
This is The Other Side of Midnight. I'm Frank Morano. Have you ever heard the term roommate parenting? Don't feel bad if you haven't, because I never had, but I didn't even know who Amber Rose was until a day or two ago. Well, teachers are blaming the rise of what they call roommate parenting for children's increasingly bad behavior at school. But what is roommate parenting? From gentle parenting to authoritative parenting, the internet has popularized varying parenting styles that sit all over the spectrum. You got helicopter parents, you got every type of parent there is. Each has its own benefits and downfalls, with many parents understanding and appreciating that it's to each their own type of a situation. But one parenting style has increasingly come under fire for the bad behavior that it's inspiring in children. And it's being called roommate parenting by one teacher describing the phenomenon online. This parenting style, or lack thereof, describes parents who only interact with their children at meal times or specific times like TV time, spending all their other time together sitting in different rooms and not speaking. So this one teacher went to Reddit, which is on the internet, and wrote, "It's time to trademark the label roommate parenting. This is my 11th year of teaching, and I cannot believe the decline in quality involved parents. This year, my team and I have coined the term roommate parenting to describe this new wave of parents. It actually explains a lot." And the teacher explains that this lax style of parenting manifests in a few specific ways, all of which are detrimental to a child's development. According to him, the first is that kids and parents are in the house, but they only interact at meal times, television time, etc. The second, the one that he shares, is that parents, or parenthesis roommates, have no involvement with homework or academics, adding, "I never help my roommate with his chemistry homework." I've never heard of this before, but I do think it's a pretty apt description of what I hear from more and more teachers. The frustration with the lack of, parents being involved with their lives. And we're not talking about helicopter parenting. We're talking about, involved parenting. The third one that this teacher mentions is revealing that kids are having to take on more responsibility at home, causing their education to suffer. Quote, "Household responsibility and taking care of the kids aged 4 and below is shared," he said. The number of kids I see taking care of kids is insane. The moment those young ones are old enough, they graduate from being taken care of to taking care of. Lastly, he adds, with parents shifting to the roommate role, teachers have become the new parents. Welcome to the new norm. It's going to be exhausting. And this teacher also revealed that parents seem to be annoyed when they get phone calls from the school complaining about their child's behavior. Getting a call from school or the teacher means immediate annoyance and response like it's a major inconvenience, compared to getting a call at 2 a.m. that your roommate is trashed at the bar. That's what he says the parents are reacting. You know, if you're in college or something, you get I never had roommates, but if you get a call that your roommate is trashed and needs to be taken home, that's kind of the reaction that they're getting from parents. With this increased responsibility at home and a lack of a close personal bond with parents and children development, their behavior is suffering. But there's a clinical psychologist by the name of Dr. Becca Bollinger, and she told the news outlet Your Tango, it is surprisingly easy to fall into being your child's roommate with all the stresses of daily life. Though getting back out of that situation is very important. Quote, if you think you've slipped into the bad habit of being your child's roommate instead of their parents, then the first step is to identify the behaviors that need to change. Next, create a consistent and hopefully daily habit of interacting with your child. I am curious if you've noticed this, whether you're a teacher, a parent, or even a child. If you've noticed parents and children living with one another like roommates rather than parents and children, let me know. 646-720-0635, 646-720-0635. What happens when parents check out? This new wave of parents are roommate parenting. And does that lead to a decline in the kind of person that child becomes? You know, I'm reading this book now. It's really interesting. And I'm going to have the author on probably next week. It's all about ADHD. And it's called, I'll save you the details of it for next week. But the author basically wrote an article, and the book is kind of an extension of the article, exploring why they don't have ADHD in Italy or in France. And essentially what she pins it on, and actually she was much closer to Matt Blaze's position on ADHD than mine. You know, my view was that this is something that is real and it is out there, but is overdiagnosed. And these children are over-medicated. Matt's position, I don't want to, get into a whole ADHD discussion because we're going to do this at length a week from today, hopefully. Matt's position basically was that there really is no ADHD. It's not a real thing. And this is a very sophisticated person that says a lot of the ADHD type behavior is a result of how parents are parenting children. And not that she's blaming any parents, but there's a different culture when it comes to French parenting versus American parenting. When it comes to disciplining children, when it comes to interacting with children, when it comes to structure, when it comes to mealtime. And she's of the belief that some of the American parenting style leads to the sorts of behavior that you could then go to an American doctor and get diagnosed as ADHD. And she really goes in depth comparing the average American parenting style, which relies heavily on television and things like that, with the average French parenting style, and how limited that the television watching is, and how the meal times are really important. It takes place 4 times a day, and they really spend a lot of time together at these meals. It's not a quick grab and go breakfast. it's a substantial amount of interaction. And I wonder how this roommate parenting trend plays out with this. Let me know if you've noticed any of this. 646-720-0635. And if so, what you think the implications are. 646-720-0635. I think this is pretty troubling if that's the case. Now, I'm a big believer in giving children space. I'm a Lenore Skenazy advocate, free range parenting, let them be independent at a relatively young age. But I also think it's important for parents to be in their children's lives. So whether you're a parent, child, or teacher, I'd love to know if you've noticed this. 646-720-0635, 646-720-0635. Also, the new host of Wheel of Fortune is going to be Ryan Seacrest. I never watched Wheel of Fortune, but I do have a lot of not that I've never seen it. I have seen it, but I never was a regular watcher of Wheel of Fortune. What do they call it? A wheel watcher? Never. But I always had a lot of respect for Pat Sajak. I thought he seemed like a great broadcaster, a great guy. And now Ryan Seacrest is taking over for him. And it's funny, Ryan Seacrest, in some respects, is the last common thing in all of American television these days. I'm always sort of lamenting how we don't have any common experiences anymore. Nobody's watching the same shows as was the case 20, 25 years ago. We don't have the same sort of frame of reference. In some respects, Ryan Seacrest as a personality, and I don't know how he was able to pull this off. Really impressive how he was able to take being on American Idol into being really everywhere. He took over for Dick Clark and hosts New Year's Rockin' Eve with millions of viewers. He took over ultimately for Regis and was the host of Live with whatever they called Regis and Kathy Lee when he was there. I think Ryan and Kelly. He's not there anymore. And he still is one of the most listened to radio DJs on popular music formats all over the country. And they put out a new promo for his turn hosting Wheel of Fortune. Here's what it sounds like.
I can't wait to get to work.
Oh, let's get you ready for fall. Go, Ryan, go!
Ryan Seacrest joins Vanna White this fall.
I'm ready!
So the fans are very divided about this. Very divided. So there's a great deal of backlash so far. And I'll be honest, I think it's even if you're a big name like Ryan Seacrest, I think it's very difficult to take over for a legend. And I think the perfect way to handle a transition like this is to do exactly what Jeopardy did. They had a series of guest hosts, about maybe a dozen or more. You had LeVar Burton, Aaron Rodgers, George Stephanopoulos, Katie Couric, that guy Mike Richards, a whole bunch of others. Ultimately, they settled on two hosts, and they would do alternating weeks. Mayim Bialik and Ken Jennings. Mayim Bialik ends up leaving. Now it's just Ken Jennings. I think that's the way to handle it. I think it's very difficult to just take over for a legend. And inevitably, you invite those sorts of comparisons. So I'm curious to see how this goes. I think Jeopardy handled it very well. And I think the fact that you're already seeing so many Wheel of Fortune fans share their thoughts about this, and a lot of them are quite negative about it, I think is not going to bode well for this show. One commenter writes, "I'm sick of seeing Ryan Seacrest. Surely there must be someone else who can host." Now, I have nothing against Ryan Seacrest. Seems like a nice enough guy, and he's hosted game shows and stuff before. But that was kind of my reaction. Not that I'm sick of seeing him, because I don't watch most of the stuff that he does. But why is he the only person that can host all of this stuff? And yet, here we are. Another person writes, Never liked Seacrest. After 40 years, I'm going to no longer be a wheel watcher. It's one social media user noted that Pat Sajak's daughter, Maggie, or anybody else but Seacrest would be better. So there's some backlash already. I think that's what happens. You can't just walk right into the shoes of a legend. You need a transition. That's my view. All right. Whether you want to talk Wheel of Fortune or roommate parenting, you can give me a call at 646-720-0635, 646-720-0635. My friend Rob, who's an interesting guy, writes, I disagree with this type of parenting. I have witnessed this on various occasions. When parents stop caring, the kids also stop caring. I think that's a good point that Rob makes. I think Rob does some work with children as well. He said it's important for kids' development for the parents to be involved in every aspect of their life. I attribute my success and my achievements on my parents and my uncles, aunts, or grandparents playing a big part in my life. He says it takes a village. So I tend to agree with that. I tend to agree. I recognize that especially in a large family, you're going to have children taking on more adult responsibilities than they otherwise would early on. You know, Jesse Kurtz, who's been a guest on this show, city council member from Atlantic City, great guy, probably listening right now, a big listener. He, I think, has either 8 or 9 children. Honestly, I lost count after 7. And I would say, how is it that when I'm in Atlantic City, big shout out, by the way, to all of our listeners on Talk Radio 1400 WOND, great guys all around in WOND. How is it that when I'm in Atlantic City, you're ever able to come meet me? Does your wife just, handle all 9 of them? And she says, no, now we're at the point where the older ones look after the younger ones. So I think there's a fine line between treating these children like roommates, as this teacher writes, and making sure they get making sure they have enough chores and responsibilities to become an adult, but not making them feel like you're not an active parent and like you're more of a roommate. So let me know what you think. 646-720-0635, 646-720-0635. This is The Other Side of Midnight. Straight ahead.
The Other Side of Midnight with Frank Morano. It's The Other Side of Midnight with Frank Morano.
Tears on My Pillow by Little Anthony and the Imperials. This is a birthday bumper music selection from my friend Diane Burrell. Diane Burrell is a wonderful person, a great realtor. She is, if there's anybody worthy of having a great birthday today and having all of her wishes come true, it is Diane. She is the sister of my friend Dan, and actually is the grandmother of my ex-girlfriend Mallory, actually. But happy birthday, Diane. And Little Anthony this song, Little Anthony and the Imperials? This is actually, in part, what Curtis Sliwa named his son for. Curtis Sliwa named his son Anthony for one of his grandfathers, Anton. I think Anton. But he called him, I think he doesn't do this anymore, but for at least the first decade of his life, he called him Little Anthony Chester. And he did that as a tribute to Little Anthony and the Imperials. Now, others disagree. Others are cynical. You know, so much of Curtis's act is, shall we say, borrowed from Bob Grant. And when Bob Grant had a granddaughter, he would refer to her without fail as Little Allison Grant. And so some people think that him using that moniker, Little Anthony, was, or Little Anthony Chester, was his way of channeling Bob saying Little Allison Grant. But
really,
that's neither here nor there. All right. 646-720-0635. 646-720-0635. Original Rick is in Original Jersey. Rick, what do you make of this trend towards roommate parenting?
Well, I've been noticing this with the tenants for the last 30 years.
With what exactly? I'm sorry?
The tenants. I have two tenants in my building, like your mother has a 3-family house. And in the last 30 years, not one of them has owned a kitchen table. They cook, and then they all go to the room separately and eat alone, watching their video games or whatever. But there's no, with my family, Frank, if I wasn't home for dinner, it was a big thing. Because that was the meal where my father got to talk to me about school and all that, because he worked on Broadway. He went to work right after dinner. And I have never seen them eat together, which is a big part of communication. Eating, and it's a big thing. That's why you go to dinner with people. It's conversation. And I've also noticed that they don't seem to ever set times. Like, you have to go to bed at a certain time. I would hear the kids playing video games 2, 3 in the morning when they get up to talk to you. It's like they'd never go in there and say, it's time to go to sleep. Go to sleep. I never saw that kind of parenting in the last 30 years. So, yeah, they are like roommates. It's basic. They go to the room separately like roommates do. They don't have any boundaries that they set like parents should. Roommates don't give you boundaries. Parents do. So I agree. It seems to be the way.
What do you think brought this change about?
Well, I'm not going to get into the whole political thing, but we all know they've been trying to destroy the family for how long? That was the whole reason for welfare not allowing a man in the house, was they were trying to destroy the black families and keep them subjugated. I mean, it was a whole political, social thing. You take away the family, you take away control of your family and give it to the politicians. The parents are not in control of their kids anymore. The teachers are. And now we see that when we see all these demonstrations at the colleges. We realize the teachers are the ones in charge, not the parents.
Yeah, well, look, I think, that's kind of what this teacher's frustration is that because the parents aren't necessarily playing the role of parent and they're acting more like roommates, the teachers are being called upon to be that parent that the child isn't getting. And so it's an interesting observation. Thank you, Rick. 646-720-0635, 646-720-0635. Matt Blaze, not that you're a parent, but you have been a child before. What do you make of this trend towards roommate parenting? You think this is a real thing that this teacher is observing?
I only wish my parents treated me like a roommate. I would have loved it. I wouldn't have to have any kind of direction. I could do whatever I want. No bedtime. I'd stay up all night playing video games if I had the opportunity. I would have loved every bit of that. And I'm sure this is a real trend because that's where we're going. That parents aren't disciplining their children anymore. I know that when I went to school, I never got in trouble in school. I had detention once, and it was for being late to school. I never got in trouble because I knew if I got in trouble, my father was home waiting for me.
Right.
So that was the discipline that I got and had to live by. Nowadays, it's the opposite.
You know, I'm going to ask you the same question that I asked Rick, but before I do, I feel like, you know, and I've talked about this before when we talk about nostalgia and other things, I feel like there's this tendency among every generation to say, you know, back in my day, these kids today, they're a bunch of bums. I feel like you could go all the way back to ancient Roman times. Well, not ancient Roman times because they had a different concept of what childhood was. But you can go at any point over the last 400 years, and there's the same lamenting of how children are being raised today as opposed to how they're being raised. But even with that disclaimer, which is really just me wondering aloud, I'll ask you the same question that I asked Rick. What do you think is leading to this rise of roommate parenting, assuming you agree it's a real thing?
I think that parents are treating their children in that way because they want to be a friend. They don't want to be a parent. And what I was saying was that when I was in school, like nowadays, the teachers can't even yell at the kids without worrying about what's the parent going to do or discipline the kids in school. Kids aren't afraid of the teacher as an authority figure as when I went to school. And I don't think that's one of those get off my lawn or back in my day
I think
things.
you're right.
That's a today thing of what's going on is where they're treating children as a friend. They don't want to, you know, every kid gets a trophy. We don't want to upset our children anymore. We want to give them everything. They don't get disciplined anymore. They're not learning anything.
Yeah.
And I think it's going to be a big problem, and it's turning into one already because we're seeing the millennials, Elias aside.
Well, he's not a millennial. He's Gen Z.
Gen Z. But the millennials that I know that have worked here, some of them, I didn't see that with. But mostly they have this sort of attitude of entitlement.
Yeah, and you know that book that we've talked about by Jeremy Murphy, F Off Chloe, he really does chronicle the role of Generation Z and millennials in the workplace, and I wonder if there's something to that. All right, 646-720-0635. Going to get back to your calls in a moment. I will tell you though that I was updating you about our battle to get brakes. And my wife and I had spent $1,300 first on brake pads and then on rotors. Let me be honest with you. You want to know about my level of car knowledge? I don't even know what a rotor is. I couldn't tell you what a rotor is. If you stopped me on the street and said, hey, sir, you've won a contest. All you have to do is tell us what a rotor is and you can win $1 million. I would not be $1 million richer. I don't know what a rotor is, but I know we spent a lot of money to have them fixed. So we had new brake pads and new rotors. And I keep thinking of Roto-Rooter, the plumbing and water cleanup right out of Ohio. But the brakes still squeak. And not only did they squeak, which it was driving my wife crazy, but what I noticed is after you pressed the brake and took your foot off the brake would almost grind. It would grind. So my wife calls after 2 trips, and this is not just expensive, it's inconvenient because you're basically without our one car the whole day. And there are children that need to be picked up, there are people that need to drive to work, there's things that need to be done. So 2 separate times we were told everything was going to be fine. Neither time was it fine. So my wife tells me, you got to go bring it back. Tell them they have to fix this. We spent $1,300 and these brakes are still squeaking. So I bring it back yesterday. I get up. I usually am asleep in the morning, but I got up in the morning as soon as this place opened, took the car over there, walked back home. And I got exactly the right attitude from the guy that I dropped it off with. He was familiar with the car because we've been there so many times. And he says, don't worry, we'll figure it out. And that's exactly what I want to hear. So when I wake up after coming home, after dropping the car off, my wife tells me she's spoken to these guys and says that they told her that something was defective. Either the brake pads or the rotors were defective. And that's why they were still squeaking when they had them fixed twice. So they tell her, and apparently they gave her a little bit of an attitude, which I just hate to hear. I mean, how do you screw up twice, charge us $1,300, and you're giving her an attitude? I think the sense that I got from the person that she spoke to was that, because I've dealt with this guy too, and he was, nice enough to me, is that maybe he's one of these guys that likes to talk down to women because he figures they don't know about cars. And so he's telling her there's something that's defective. We're going to fix it at no expense, at no cost to you. But the way he said it was like he was expecting some sort of praise or some sort of huge thank you. Oh, no cost to us, aside from the $1,300 that we already just paid you. Yeah, of course it's no cost to us because you gave us defective brake pads. So they finally, and you should have heard the amount of gaslighting that was being done before we got to this process. They said, oh, no, just drive it around a little bit. It'll go away. Didn't go away, the squeaking. Just do a hard brake on it. It'll go away. I think at one point they were even blaming the weather. There were more excuses for the squeaking of these brakes than there was for why President Biden performed poorly in the debate. Oh, maybe the brakes have a cold. Maybe the brakes were traveling around the world 12 days ago. Maybe the brakes were over-prepared, right? We heard everything. So finally, they go through this whole process again, leave us without the car the whole day. We couldn't pick up Carmine from summer camp. My stepmother had to go pick him up. And I go to this store, the mechanic. Thankfully, it's walking distance. And they're waiting for me. I said, hey, we got the Tucson. And here's a little bit. They said they're going to get the car. Everything should be fine. And here's a little bit of my conversation with this gentleman, George, in this mechanic shop. Thanks. So my wife mentioned something was defective.
No. The original brakes were done. They squeaked because there was no other way to get the pads. What was it, dealer pads we put on when they squeaked, or vice versa? Matt, you remember? Because I think the ones we put on were Waterport International. So those pads squeaked. We replaced them. Those pads are going back, and we're going to just put different pads.
Great. And so the rotors we just got, those are
fine. Yeah, but for this car, there's not many options for brakes.
Gotcha.
It's very limited
Okay.
for some reason.
All right.
So.
I appreciate all the help. Thank you.
Yours.
Now, what's interesting about that conversation is this, and I really didn't realize this because honestly, I am the worst consumer in the world. Not just when it comes to cars, but when it comes to everything. You could tell me, oh, I'm like a Seinfeld episode. Oh, you need a new Johnson rod. Oh yeah, Johnson rod. Yeah, I need that. Yeah. So I just accept this explanation. I go about my merry way. And I'm happy that we have a car that no longer squeaks when you try to brake. I'm happy that there's a car that no longer grinds when you try to brake. And I go to my wife and I said, well, wait a minute. This is what happened. And she said, wait a minute. He's telling you that nothing was defective, but that the brake pads that he gave us squeaked? Isn't that the definition of defective? And why did he say defective to me on the phone? So again, when I asked him, my wife mentioned something was defective.
No. The original brakes were done. They squeaked because there was no other way to get the pads. What was it, dealer pads we put on when they squeaked, or vice versa? Matt, you remember? Because I think the ones we put on were Waterport International. So those pads squeaked. We replaced them. Those pads are going back.
Yeah, so those pads are going back. Sounds like they're defective. Why couldn't he just say they're defective? Instead, I ask, are they defective? He says, defective?
No. The original brakes were done. They squeaked because there was no other way to get the pads.
I don't even know what that means. But I just accept it, right? Rachel does not. All right, 646-720-0635. Hello, Zach.
Hey, well, they're always going to try to find mechanics. There's always something else wrong. And I mean, you're better off for just saying, okay, whatever. Like, you tell me what I got to pay, I'm going to pay it, because it's going to be a whole nightmare. But with the parent roommate thing, like, to summarize more or less what Matt Blaze said and the other guy before, it's what it all comes down to, I think, is constant seeking for instant gratification. And like, that has eroded us for so long. I mean, since like television became a thing, and then it became a thing in everybody's bedroom as well. But yeah, I mean, with video games as well, I think it all comes down to like, well, and so that erodes the parent thing in a way, where it's like, instead of looking for the long haul lesson to teach their child that he'll learn, down the road and to put in the hard work, we just want instant, make my kid happy, distract them, keep them occupied. And yeah, we lose all those tough lessons that come from putting the work in.
Yeah, I think you might be. I think others have made a similar point, Zach. But I think you're right. I think you're absolutely right, Zach. Thank you for that. I think instant gratification is something. But you know what it is, and I think there was a gentleman that was calling to say this, and I'm sorry I didn't get to him quickly enough. But I think he's exactly right. You know what I think part of it is you don't have the time. There's two parents in many instances working. And you almost you're so focused on getting work done that you don't necessarily put in that time when it comes to parenting. So I think that is interesting. Just going back to the brakes thing for a second, and this is the last thing I'll mention about it. Brakes are so important. I once had a vehicle that was an older car. I bought it used, and then I drove it for a while. It was a great car. I really love this car. It was a Ford Taurus. And I could feel the brakes starting to slip. I could feel the brakes starting to go. But I figured, all right, maybe I can get another couple of days out of it. Right? I didn't have money. And this is about, 15 years ago. And I'm driving this one night, and I have a young lady with me, my girlfriend at the time. We're on a date, and we're going to this party, and all of a sudden, it goes to having very little brakes to no brakes, none. And so I'm trying to stop this car with no brakes, none. And ultimately, and I'm trying to use the emergency brake, but I was traveling down a hill, basically. So the emergency brake only does so much. It slowed us down, but I'm trying to slow down to make sure I don't crash into anything and steer into a point that I don't really get anybody hurt, including those in the car. Now, it just so happened that there was snow on the ground. It was December or January. And I end up directing this onto the side of the road on basically an abandoned road in a snowdrift. And it was really inconvenient because it was the middle of the night, and I called a friend of mine that lived near there. He didn't come help me. I called another friend of mine that lived farther away, my friend Rich Hoffman, who came through in flying colors, and he picked us up and took us home. But it was really inconvenient. And I just kind of left my car there for a day until a tow truck could come the next day. So ultimately, obviously, the brakes were busted. It was going to be more money to fix this car than the car was worth. So I ended up getting a new used car. And the first question my girlfriend at the time, Christiane, was, does it have brakes? I said, yes, it has brakes. She said, then that sounds like a perfect car for me. So that is, brakes are essential to a car. If they're squeaking a little bit, I guess that happens. Not ideal for certain, but as long as they stop a car, that's, in my experience, what the most important aspect of a brake is. as far as I'm concerned. All right, 646-720-0635, 646-720-0635. This is The Other Side of Midnight. Straight ahead.
The Other Side of Midnight. It's The Other Side of Midnight with Frank Morano.
Love me tender, love me sweet, never let me go. You have made my life complete, and I love you so.
The great Elvis Presley singing Love Me Tender. Another birthday bumper music selection from Diane Burrell. A terrific selection, if ever there was one. Well, one piece of great news and another, well, for the planet anyway, and one piece of interesting news that I'll share with you. Europe is back in space. Europe has rejoined the space race after its long-awaited Ariane 6 rocket launched in a successful first test on Tuesday. The European Space Agency retired the Ariane 5 last July, leaving it reliant on Elon Musk's SpaceX to carry satellites. The new rocket is meant to make up some of the lost ground to private companies. Le Monde is reporting that that's unlikely to be enough. So Ariane is an expendable rocket designed for one launch a month, while SpaceX can launch its reusable rockets every day. So one European weather satellite organization has already canceled its plans to use Ariane, choosing SpaceX instead. Europe risks finding itself a generation behind, is what they're saying. So single-use rockets will seem like a cloth biplane in an age of jets. But they did do this launch of this new Ariane 6 rocket, of this successful first space test. I think it's interesting. All right. Here is what I think is really strange. I like this story because I think it involves having a sense of humor, which is far too lacking. One of the reasons I really don't do much in terms of April Fool's Day is because on April Fool's Day, everyone's expecting a joke, right? Everyone's expecting you to try to put one over on them. It's very difficult to come up with something that folks aren't expecting that can get the job done. Something that I think was a pretty effective April Fool's joke is what the sports betting website and app FanDuel did. FanDuel on April 1st, took bets on some mixed martial arts fights. No big deal, right? So April 1st, 2022. But April Fools, the matches had already happened. They were taking bets on April 1st on these matches that already happened. And I think it's hysterical. Apparently, no one else does, because they have now been fined. Regulators apparently found that you cannot take bets on events that have already happened, even if it's April Fool's Day. As funny as this is, I kind of get it, right? I mean, you can't allow people to place bets on events that have already happened. I mean, it's just not right. It's just not right. It doesn't bode well for gaming. Now, should they have given them a break because it is a very creative April Fool's joke? I think so. Give them a break. But apparently regulators in the state of New Jersey did not think the same thing. What do you make of this, Matt Blaze? It's okay to take bets on April Fool's Day?
I'm just wondering, nobody realized these matches already happened?
Well, I think
what if you did and you're like, oh, wait, this happened already. I'm gonna place $10,000 on this guy because I know I'm gonna win.
Yeah, that's
how does nobody not know this? Especially it's just people that bet on anything. Like I'm gonna bet on something. I'm gonna bet on something that I'm into. Right? You bet on football, baseball, basketball, stuff that I watch. I don't just arbitrarily bet on something I have no interest in.
Yeah.
How would you not?
It is a bit amazing. So it might have seemed, so they accepted 34 bets on the fights that were promoted by the sportsbook as live events scheduled to take place on April 1st. But the fights actually took place a week earlier. So they fined FanDuel, New Jersey gambling regulators fined FanDuel $2,000 for the mistake, and the company paid out over $230,000 to settle the bets. So FanDuel's not commenting, but the New Jersey Division of Gaming Enforcement said in a letter made public on Monday that FanDuel said it was not notified by its providers that the matches were actually a recording of events that had already happened. So FanDuel is saying they weren't doing a April Fool's joke.
That's insane. So, how could you not know that the fights already took place?
It is amazing. FanDuel told the state that on April 1st, it took 26 online wagers and 8 retail wagers worth $190,094 on the event. Afterwards, FanDuel received a notification from the International Betting Integrity Association, which monitors sports betting transactions, looking for suspicious activity or out of the ordinary patterns, that the events that it was offering odds on had already happened. So FanDuel paid off the wagers in the amount of $231,000. So they paid up to the people that placed these bets. So I don't know how this happened. I mean,
so they had to pay out if people won. Right. They had to give back the money if people lost. But it sounds like somebody at FanDuel messed up and didn't know what they were doing and put it out there because it has to be out on the app in order to make the bet in the first place. It's not like all of a sudden people just go, hey, I want to bet on this fight. You go through a process of go, oh, here's the fights. Here's what I can bet on. Here's what I'll bet. They don't just bet on whatever. It's like you can't just say, hey, I want to bet on these 2 rats racing down the street and do it through FanDuel.
Yeah. No,
it doesn't make any sense.
This is true. So apparently it was not intentional on FanDuel's part, but they're blaming it on the Professional Fighters League, that the event had previously occurred and was being presented via a tape delay. So there you have it. We'll see. Very odd situation that it just happened to be April 1st, and they were made fools of. Hey, speaking of South Jersey, at the end of the month, we are going to be on vacation in Cape May, New Jersey, and it looks like I am going to miss this Pat Cooper celebration of life that's going to take place on his 95th birthday. Now, I was a huge fan of Pat Cooper, and I had the privilege of interviewing him many times. For instance, I will never tire of asking him the difference between gravy and sauce.
You know, I announced last week that I was going to have you on the radio this week, or try to have you on the radio. And I asked callers what I should bring up with you. And the number one suggestion that I said I would bring up was the debate between sauce and gravy. The red stuff that you put on your pasta, is it sauce or is it gravy? What's the difference?
You know, that's the easiest question in the world. All right? Gravy is with the meatballs and the pork and the chambot. You put everything in there. All right? Sauce is when you make it like a marinara.
That's exactly what I said.
With basil, with a little basil in there. Nice, maybe a little bit of garlic. Nice. But the other one is a jambot. It's like pushing a truck. When the guy says, you know, I want a nice marinara sauce, you don't have meatballs, you don't have pork. You can have a chicken cacciatore sauce. That's another sauce.
Pat,
but when they start to make, see, only Italians fight over sauce. The country's going to the toilet, and we're going, what kind of sauce did your mother make? Then if you didn't like what the mother made, you said, well, she's not a real Italian. She was born there. What is she, a fake?
So anyway, that went on for about 10 minutes. But they're having this celebration of life for him while I'm in Cape May, New Jersey. So I'm wondering if it makes sense for me to drive back just for the day to come back for the celebration of life. I think I did that last year for somebody else's funeral. You know what the problem is? I know too many dead people. I'm like Haley Joel Osment. So that's what I'm wrestling with. If you want to email me and offer me your 2 cents, feel free to do. Say frank.morano@redappleaudionetworks.com. Your influence counts. Use it.
This is The Other Side of Midnight with Frank Morano.
They're running a strange program, y'all.
Now, here's Frank Morano.
Good morrow, everyone. This is The Other Side of Midnight. I'm Frank Morano. You know, it's interesting, kind of going with this subject that we end up talking about almost every day. Children these days don't play with toys. They play with computers. My son plays with toys. He plays with cars. But by and large, children aren't playing with action figures. I'm sure some do, but by and large, they're not. They're not playing with the Slinky. They're not playing with silly putty. They're playing with electronics and video games and things of that nature. And whatever, that's just the way things are going. But in any event, I'm participating in this Zoom meeting the other day. And before the meeting starts, there's a couple of older guys. I think one's in his 70s, one's maybe in his 50s or 60s. And they're talking about toy trains. You know, the Lionel-style trains. And they're talking about this train shop that they both go to where you can get apparently a lot of cool train parts. And one of them says to the other, you know, when I'm in there, the only people that I see in there are old men like us. I don't see any children. The other guy says, yeah, that's right. Kids today don't, sorry, I knocked over the microphone, don't play with trains anymore. It's something that's only for adults. And I thought that was interesting because my dad has Lionel trains and he used to keep them set up all the time. Now I think he only sets them up around Christmas time and puts them around the tree. And, you know, that's true. He's an older guy and he's still into these Lionel trains. Then our son's former babysitter, who's a friend of mine, Lorraine, she took Carmine to her house a couple of weeks ago when he was off from summer camp. And her husband has this basement that is filled with toys. There's action figures. I go to pick them up. There's just all sorts of stuff. It's like a museum into 1970s Americana. There's baseball figurines. There's science fiction stuff. There's models. And yes, there's this huge, elaborate Lionel train toy setup. And I got to tell you, my son's only 2.5. He loved it. He likes all that stuff, cars and trains. And I mean, what kid doesn't? And my Lorraine's husband let him push the button, make the train go. We got such a kick out of that. And it got me thinking, why don't kids play with things like Lionel trains anymore. And then it got me, my wonder was satiated because I looked at what kids do spend their time with, and they spend their time either with electronics or on scheduled sporting events, the Little League game that's scheduled, basketball game that's scheduled, whatever game that's scheduled, karate lesson that's scheduled, very little unscheduled play. It does exist a little bit, especially in our neighborhood, where a lot of the boys just play outside in the front, whatever they're playing, but it's rarer and rarer. So in the last week or two, I have seen a wide variety of articles chronicling adults playing with toys. And, you know, USA Today did this big article about a gentleman named Tom Schuller. Headline is, "For some toy sellers, packing shelves with nostalgia pays off." Tom Schuller first began selling antiques and collectibles on eBay in 2005 when he was 18 and his antiques dealer dad retired. He continued to dabble in sales, but realized during the pandemic that he could turn his business of buying and selling toys that conjure people's nostalgia for their childhood into a full-time job. So now this guy's 38 years old. He quit his job as a restaurant server, and he's now making over $100,000 a year selling vintage toys on eBay. He exclusively buys and sells nostalgia toy items. Anything that just reminds people of better times when they were younger or of grandma's house. It could be anything from a knick-knack to toys, and their parents sold it at a yard sale when they went off at school. And he says toys aren't just for kids. Well, that's not he's saying this, the USA Today reporter saying this. This year, for the first time, and this is kind of a blockbuster banner statistic, consumers 18 and older surpassed toddlers to become the biggest demographic for toy purchases. Isn't that incredible? Adults are now buying more toys than toddlers are for the first time. And then I thought, let's look around my office. I see, oh boy, there's a presidential bobblehead doll. There's a baseball bobblehead doll. There's a Ric Flair wrestling action figure. There's a small model of Statler and Waldorf from the Muppets. I am doing the same thing. I've got toys. And, you know, I keep a lot of these. I have a variety of Ric Flair action figures and from a variety of different models. And I really don't play with them. I just keep them in their original box. I'm not sure why. I mean, they're not really worth anything, but I still keep them in the original box as sort of a decoration. Kind of wondering maybe I should play with them or something. But there is this growing trend of adults playing with toys. And it is everywhere. I go to my friend Jack's house for his birthday or something. And I don't know if it was his birthday, whatever. I go there. It was maybe about 6 months ago. And he has this whole room that he has set up just with sports toys and wrestling toys. And honestly, I think we are rapidly approaching the time where toys are for adults. Whether it's for nostalgia purposes, which I think is mostly what's driving it, or whether it's or something else here, adults is now a toy thing, or toys are now an adult thing. Here's James Zahn speaking to CGTN about how toy companies are actually now targeting adults.
The difference between a kid toy and a kidult toy can be many different things. The bottom line is it has to be something that adults are willing to spend their own money on for themselves. And this is a trend that has been around for a little while, where essentially the adult collector has existed forever. There were Hot Wheels and Barbie collectors and people that were into farm toys and vintage artifacts from the 50s and 60s. Well, those were old toys that people were rebuying because they actually existed then. Now the toy makers are starting to tap back into that, and they're making new things geared toward a grown-up audience.
I think, the term that he used there, if it's new to you, I had to look it up. The term that he used there is kidult. Kidult. Basically, it's adults that do things that children do, like play with toys. I am curious, are you one of these kidults? Do you have any sort of a toy collection? And why do you collect toys? Is it, as the gentleman in this USA Today article stated, to channel some aspect of nostalgia? Or is it something else here? 646-720-0635. 646-720-0635. If you're not calling from a mobile phone, then you do have to use the number 1 prior to dialing 646-720-0635. Here's James Zahn.
We found an article from 1986 where a rep from Mattel was touting that they believed that there were 3,000 adult Barbie collectors in the U.S. Well, now that number has gone out. I mean, it's exploded because Barbie is having a moment. But what's happening now is the past few years, if you look at toy sales in 2023 versus pre-pandemic, 2019, they're actually still up for kids. What really happened is skewed numbers. The pandemic, everybody was staying at home. That's when a lot of adults started reconnecting with their own childhood, started buying things. Of course, those same adults were buying more for their kids. So you ended up with 2020, 2021, very skewed, inflated numbers. And it started to downslide last holiday season. So they're facing tough comps. But this adult business has always been there.
And I think it's really interesting because my friend that I referenced, who's very well-to-do, and he's got this room full of toys, that's when it started for him during the pandemic. And I don't know what it was about the pandemic. Clearly, there's a lot that you could do, right? I went roller skating for the first time in 20 years during the pandemic, and a lot of other things you could do. But why did so many adults start gravitating towards toys? Is it a question of nostalgia or is it something else? 646-720-0635. By the way, speaking of nostalgia, do you know what is back in spades? The flavor orange cream. Like a popsicle or a creamsicle. And this classic flavor combination of orange and cream, or oranges and cream, is now, it's a century old. But it is, meaning the creamsicle with the orange cream flavor, it is now enjoying a huge resurgence. All these big companies are coming out, and I've noticed this. I saw in the grocery store recently, and in fact, I actually tried it. It was pretty good. An orange cream flavored sparkling water, which was delicious. And Wendy's now has a limited time orange dreamsicle frosty. Carvel has an orange dreamy creamy, it's like an ice cream sandwich or a flying saucer. Coffee Mate, the coffee creamer, they've unveiled a limited time orange cream pop flavored coffee creamer. Starbucks has an orange cream cake pop. So why the sudden resurgence in orange cream? Well, they are saying it's due to the same thing that's led to the uptick in these toys. Nostalgia. Joe Franklin would be very proud. 646-720-0635. Coming up in a bit, we got Noam Laden and Brian Kilmeade. Brian Kilmeade did a really interesting interview with Donald Trump yesterday where he made a ton of news and provided some insight as to who his vice presidential nominee might be. He didn't give no smoking gun here, but I'll ask Brian about it. All right, let me say hello to Pauline in Queens. Hi, Pauline.
Hi. As parents, I've I'm a grandparent now, but it gives us all a new level of playing with toys. We all, when you're buying your children toys, it sort of reminds you of your own childhood, and I believe that's really what's behind all of this. It's part of, some of us did, like I didn't grow up with a lot of toys, so I never had toys. And so I didn't ever have a doll. And even finally, as I'm an adult, I finally bought myself a doll. But like you, I have it in a box and I don't play with it. And why not? What do I care if it's going to be valued in 20,000 years from now?
Right.
How much it'll be worth, right? It's like you got to be in the moment and you got to enjoy it. And if we didn't have some of this stuff, a lot of us, probably had deprived childhoods if our parents were working, didn't have a lot of money. And as you grow up and you can afford it for your children, you sort of maybe play vicariously through them. But now people are starting to play with it because this is stuff that we lacked when we were children, so we never really healed. There's a part of our child in us that we really need to heal.
So, Pauline, what you think this is, the not resurgence, but this uptick in adults buying toys, and actually more adults buying toys than toddlers for the first time in history, is you think this is adults trying to make up for something they didn't have when they were kids?
Yeah, because you squash that child in you. If you had to grow up, some of us had to grow up faster than other kids, immigrant kids especially, because they, their parents were busy working. I'm not saying that no other kids did, but as an immigrant child, they were so busy working and they made us study only. So I didn't have time for that kind of stuff. I never got to play with any other things, and that made me too serious, and that has made me not be as joyful and happy as I see my grandchildren. And I just wish they would do the more, like mundane toys like we used to have. I mean, we could make toys out of anything because we didn't have money.
Right, sure.
So we would play with the pots and pans or whatever. I don't even know what I play with because unless neighbor gave me a gift. And I was always thrilled when I got a little thing from them, a pocketbook, anything like a toy that everybody else had. I didn't.
Pauline, thank you. I appreciate that. My mom, she has a really impressive Barbie doll collection, but I think she sold, I don't know how much of it she still has. She sold some of it on eBay. And then a lot of the rest of it, whenever little girls come to her house for whatever reason, daughter of so-and-so, granddaughter of so-and-so, she gives one of these little girls a Barbie doll. So I'm not sure how much she still has, but for a long time, she did have a pretty impressive Barbie doll collection. 646-720-0635. In fact, I think I still have at her house some older wrestling toys in the basement somewhere. I have to check on that. Next time I'm over there, I'm gonna see about that. Joe is in Ronkonkoma. Hi, Joe.
Hey, Frank. How are you doing tonight?
Great. I hope you had a nice birthday and a great Independence Day.
I spent it with family, and thank you. I collect vintage gaming consoles like the old Ataris and stuff like that. I actually located a Pong that I purchased from years ago. I like it because it reminds me of my childhood. I've been rebuying a lot of toys that I had when I was a kid, and a lot of them are in the box. A lot of them are out of the box, but it just makes me feel good and reminds me of simpler times.
Yeah. When did you start collecting?
About 7 or 8 years ago. Me and my brother-in-law and my sister are very into it. And, going to antique shops, garage sales, you see something, it makes you remind you of when you were a kid, and it makes you feel good. So,
have you noticed, since you started pre-pandemic, have you noticed an uptick in adults collecting toys since the pandemic?
Yes. And it's funny, the Voltron and stuff like that from when we were kids are in high demand, like He-Man, a lot of the cartoon things from the 80s. People go nuts to this stuff. If you're at a yard sale and you see something like that, scoop it up if you can get it for a good price.
So give me the ones to look out for. You said He-Man and what else?
I like the Voltron and the Transformers, Star Wars a lot, but a lot of people have Star Wars right now. But if you like Battlestar Galactica, if you see stuff like that, yeah, it's very hard to find. Grab it if you get it cheap. And That's what I usually look for. Have a great night, Frank.
Joe, real quick, even if it's played with, you should still scoop it up?
Yeah, well, my neighbor about 2 weeks ago was throwing out a toy box, and it was a vintage toy box. My daughter was like, Dad, we should grab that. And inside it were toys. And then she ended up giving me a whole bunch of stuff that I had when I was a kid.
Wow.
And I will not sell it. I wrapped it up and I put it in my a tote, and I'm going to save that until my kids are older.
Yeah.
Hey, have a great night, Frank. Be
Thanks.
safe.
You too, Joe. Who can forget that episode of Seinfeld where Jerry meets a girlfriend who has a girlfriend named Celia, and she has really a remarkable toy collection, a collection of toys that has never been played with.
Oh, yeah, the toys.
Where did you get all these?
My dad was a collector. I inherited them after he died from a long, painful bout with...
Super Bowl! Hey, an original G.I. Joe. With the full frogman suit.
Jerry, what are you doing?
I'm putting this on him and we're going to the sink.
Oh, Jerry! They're priceless. They've never been played with.
I just want to touch him a little.
I said no. Now, come here.
So 3 dates and she still won't let me play with the toys.
That's interesting. You know, someone mentioned to me you were not very happy with your toys growing up.
Yeah, that was me.
That's right. And you mentioned that you didn't get a G.I. Joe. You had...
An Army Pete.
Right.
So it's interesting. Jerry had that same experience that some of you were talking about. He was kind of deprived and, you know, used trying to play with these toys as an opportunity to plug some gap in his toy history. Hey, it was on this day in 1767 that President John Quincy Adams was born. And it was on this day as well in 2007 that former First Lady Lady Bird Johnson died. You know, I was perusing the U.S. Postal Service website yesterday for some stamps, and I found a couple of cool stamps that I had not purchased before. And one of the stamps that they had released was the Betty Ford stamp. I didn't have any, so I ordered a sheet of those Betty Ford stamps. So that's kind of cool. That's another thing that I have I wouldn't say I collect them, but I have a bunch of stamps that are kind of cool that I don't send. I usually get two. When I get one of these sheets of stamps, I save one and then I use the other one to mail letters. Hey, Brian Kilmeade is going to join us in a bit. And he spoke with President Trump yesterday on the radio. And, you know, Brian Kilmeade's politics, or his views, I should say, on foreign policy are a bit different from where Donald Trump is. I think Trump, to be honest, is much closer to me. And Kilmeade is much closer to a typical neocon position. And so Kilmeade asked him yesterday if Trump wants to get out of NATO. This is what he said.
There's people that believe that you want to get out of NATO. Is that what you want to do?
No, I just want them to pay their bills. We're protecting Europe. They take advantage of us very badly. Not so much worse, I tell you what, very badly. You look at China. It's, China is terrible, but I straightened them out. And then we had COVID, and I had to focus on other things, and we did an incredible job. We got it back. We saved the country. This country would have got into a massive depression if I weren't president.
So I will ask him about that interview coming up in a few minutes. Meantime, let me say hello to Brian in New Jersey. Hi, Brian.
Yeah, good morning, Frank. Yeah, I think a lot of these adults buying toys, the famous Noam Laden did a story on the Legos, and they're worth a lot of money, and people are buying them, storing them, reselling them. I think a lot of it has to do with looking for a payout.
Yeah, well, I think you're right. But, I think a lot of these folks, you just heard Joe call in and say he would never sell some of these toys that have sentimental value. I think there's some of that going on too. So I think there's both. I think some people are doing it as basically an investment, and some are doing it just because they like having these toys around. I mean, in the case of these Ric Flair dolls that I have, that's definitely the case. You know, I'm not looking to make any money. I don't think they're worth anything. I just kind of like having them there. It's kind of fun. Brian, thank you. 646-720-0635. We will talk with the aforementioned Noam Laden in a moment, and Brian Kilmeade joins us straight ahead.
The Other Side of Midnight with Frank Morano. It's The Other Side of Midnight with Frank Morano. Frank Morano.
This is a classic song that you don't hear nearly enough these days, as far as I'm concerned. And this is a bumper music selection from our listener of the week, Michael Scott Cutler, who, rumor has it, is a longtime fan of our newsman, Noam Laden.
Stand by for the other side of Midnight's news.
From New York City, the other side of midnight and its affiliated stations present national and international news with Frank Morano and news director Noam Laden. Their summary of the world news and personal comments. Get the rest of the story.
What's going on now?
Good morning. Frank, wanted to follow up. I heard you talking about toys this morning.
Do you collect any?
I do not.
None.
You seem like you're the kind of guy that does collect.
I have a collection of presidential bobbleheads.
Oh, you do?
Not every president, but I have a lot.
Who
of
are you missing?
There's a few. I don't think I have a Jimmy Carter bobblehead. I don't think I have a. Let's see. I don't have a Woodrow Wilson.
Do you have them all lined up in order?
I
in your
have
home?
done that, but no, they're in different places.
And why is that?
I don't know, because I don't have the space for 20 of them to be lined up somewhere. But, you know, we were cleaning my office on Saturday because my brother-in-law is staying with us, and, it's now a guest bedroom. And I noticed that somebody broke my Thomas Jefferson bobblehead doll,
Wow.
which I got to say I'm pretty annoyed with. So.
Maybe it was during that ping pong party that we had at your house, because you had a lot of people over, and they were all over your house.
There's always a lot of people over. You go room to room, you don't know who's there.
Yeah.
So somebody.
Maybe it's time to put up a camera.
Took out Jefferson's legs. I'm gonna crazy glue it today.
How do they not come to you? I mean, some accidents happen. And I would say, Frank, I'm sorry.
It's probably my 2-year-old. Probably my 2-year-old.
Oh, you think so?
I think so, yeah. Either that or the author of Thomas Jefferson and the Barbary Pirates, but we'll find out on that front.
So I was telling you, I don't know, a week or so ago about how valuable Legos have become.
Right.
That certain pieces go for hundreds of dollars. Some of those little figurines can even go for like $1,000. It is like there's one guy out there who says it's better than working the stock market, the trading and selling of Legos. And now fast forward to a story about a racket that's been broken up in Eugene, Oregon, where police went in, and they've now found that this store that was selling high-priced and valuable pieces of Lego apparently may have been hiring people to steal pieces from other people. Some $200,000 worth of stolen Legos found in this store called Brick Builders in Eugene, Oregon this week. And so, again, another version of this story of how valuable these Legos have become, that people are now stealing them and reselling them to these hobby stores who then sell pieces to just individuals who are either collectors or people who just want certain pieces.
That is wild, and never something that I would think about. I also noticed this is the third day in a row that you brought us an Oregon story. What's going on with you in Oregon?
I just have a love for Oregon. Yeah, is it Oregon or Oregon?
Oregon.
Oregon.
In my last interview with Joe Lieberman before he died, he talked about how when he was running for vice president, how he told the people there how happy he was to be in Oregon, and he got booed like crazy, and he learned the hard way. It's Oregon.
By the way, I think you had the very last interview.
I think it
with
was
him.
actually. Yeah, I think it was.
Is that up somewhere?
It's on, if you go to redapplepodcastnetwork.com and type in Joe Lieberman, it comes up. Up. So thank you, Noam.
And now you know the rest of the story.
I'll link to it on Twitter as well. Well, speaking of people running for president, yesterday, America's leading presidential candidate did an exclusive interview with our next guest. It has made a ton of news, especially the discussion on the issue of who his vice presidential candidate is going to be.
Big rally last night, I will say.
I know, it was good. I thought it was significant that you had the vice president, kind of a vice presidential finalist, Marco Rubio, introduce you. It makes sense because it's a Florida congressman. But what did you think of his speech? What did you think of? What do you think about him now, knowing that it's only going to be days away from making an announcement?
Well, he's very good, and we have some great people that we're looking at. We have, as they say, a deep bench. But Marco was great last night, very popular. And he's certainly one of the people that we're looking at out, over the next week or so, I'll announce. I'd love to do it during the convention. In the old days, they did it during the convention, and it kept the convention very exciting, actually. So we'll see about that. But pretty soon we'll be announcing. But we have some great people, as you know all of them.
The interview has made a ton of news, not only nationally, but internationally. Brian Kilmeade joins us now. Brian, congratulations on such a news-making interview.
Hey, thanks, Frank. It's always interesting talking to the former president at a time in which that he's enjoying not being in the headlines. He's watching this sideshow happen on the other side. And, people have speculated that maybe if Joe Biden's going to go to try to hurt the RNC, he'll announce it next week. But he's got another interview with Lester Holt on the schedule. He's going to be tough to push out. This is fascinating because the RNC is also going to be interesting. They're going to focus more on people than celebrities. They're not looking for George Clooney. They're not looking for any big names. Not that Hollywood's any around the Republicans anyway, outside maybe John Voight and James Woods.
And let's not
forget, they're going to look for regular people to tell the story. They want to be the blue collar people, the blue collar party.
Brian, I want to talk to you about the Biden situation in just a second because honestly, I'm dumbfounded that he's still in the race. I would have lost that bet if we were placing bets the night of the debate. I would have absolutely lost that bet. But talk to me about your interview with the president. It seems like he's down. At least this is what's being reported to 3 vice presidential running mates: J.D. Vance, Doug Burgum, and Marco Rubio. What was your impression as to when he might make his pick? Do you think he'll wait to the convention, or will it be within the next day or two? And what was your impression in terms of who he's leaning towards?
He's going to make it this weekend. I initially think the plan was today, and when this stuff with Biden just didn't stop. I mean, remember, a few days afterwards, Biden just laid low. He said, okay, I'm just going to do nothing, as I usually do. And after 3 or 4 days, it got so bad, he had to go out and actually do his job and do an interview with George Stephanopoulos, and it just kept heating up. So from the Trump perspective, they thought, what do we do here? Should we watch it? And does that play a role in who you pick? For example, if Biden's out, logic says Kamala's in. If she turns around and takes a battleground governor, let's say Pennsylvania, Shapiro, let's say Whitmer, Michigan, do you say, I need Youngkin in Virginia? Does that help me get Virginia? Because now I need Virginia. I'm probably going to lose Pennsylvania instead of winning by 5. So that, I think, figures all into it. Now, President Trump says, not really. I asked him twice, do you want Joe Biden to stay? Because I know it's the policies. He goes, the policies are terrible. That's why I'm winning. So it doesn't matter who it is. They have the same radical policies. So
I know that he'll
behind
say
the scenes,
that.
the strategists have a little different.
I know that he'll say that, but the truth is, of course, it matters who the nominee is. If you have a swing voter that hates a lot of Trump's personality quirks, but like his policies, they may be less likely to vote for someone who they believe is cognitively diminished than someone that they view as maybe lacking in a few policy areas, but of better, mental acuity than President Biden.
Yeah, I mean, I'm dumbfounded he's still in. I am flabbergasted. This is worse than the Russiagate. And we learned, the only reason Trump won is because he cheated with Vladimir Putin. Hillary Clinton, everybody knows he's an illegitimate president. So for 2.5 years, every time they had an infrastructure week, anytime he had a North Korea meeting with Kim Jong-un to talk about, de-escalating this would-be war, didn't matter because he'd come back and it turns out Don Jr. had a meeting with somebody. And then when the Mueller report comes out and there was no there, they never went back and said, wow, we really blew it. I jumped to conclusions for no reason. Now, everyone, George Clooney, Chuck Todd said 2 years ago, I had a conversation with a cabinet member and that cabinet member said, I don't know how he runs for re-election. I can't believe it. Mm-hmm. Really? You held on. You had this show called Meet the Press, and you never thought one time to open up his real concerns among high-ranking cabinet officials that Joe Biden can finish out this term, let alone another term? You don't think that is worthy? Now all these people, George Clooney's fundraiser, now he has a problem with Joe Biden as fundraiser. 3 weeks ago he didn't. And now the New York Times praising themselves for great journalism, but you ignored it for 2.5 years. So I can't believe that they think that we're going to give them credit for this when your show, my show, would say, did you see Joe Biden not be able to leave the stage yesterday? Did you see how confused he looked? Did anyone understand what he said at that press conference when he saluted what about the time he saluted the woman who died? A congresswoman wants to know if she was there and she was dead. And, all this stuff that was going on. Hey, guys, don't be cruel. Don't be a cheap fake. Don't go for the cheap fakes. Don't manipulate that video at the G7. Now, all of a sudden, Jake Tapper's monologue looks like Sean Hannity's monologue, and he doesn't want to acknowledge it. If you just acknowledge, I blew it. I missed all the signs. I wanted to, and then I'm like, okay, I'll keep that in mind next time when I need you to seek out a story. But at least you'd acknowledge it. They're trying to pull the wool over eyes as if they just discovered it.
Brian, there was a last question about the Veep stakes, and then I have a question about what a post-Biden Democratic ticket may look like. But I know you brought up the issue of Rubio, who's a Florida resident, and you got that problem with the 12th Amendment. How are they going to get around that? How are they going to have a presidential and a vice presidential nominee from Florida and still be able to count the electoral votes from Florida?
Well, I understand. I talked to Lindsey Graham about that. He's a lawyer yesterday. He says it's really not a problem at all. I go, what do you mean? He goes, he's got a residence in Washington. He would resign immediately. They appoint someone in his spot way ahead of the election. So this will be no problem. And he said, and I told Trump that it's not a problem.
But so
the Trump team
Rubio would have
to
resign then in that scenario.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, he would. And the thing is, do you remember when he ran for president?
Sure.
He was telling people, I never liked being a senator. And then when he dropped out, they quickly said, Marco's going to run for that spot. He doesn't want to just be out of government. It didn't look like Trump was going to win, I guess. And DeSantis was winning the Senate primary. And DeSantis ends up stepping aside. We know what happened to him, became one of the best governors in the country. So then he went back. And we don't hear much about it. But then when Trump became president, he made Rubio's job fantastic because he said, why don't you handle Cuba and Venezuela? Why don't you work with John Bolton and Kelly and whatever, and who used to run the South Command, the Southern Command of the Army? Why don't you work with them? And he loved it. And he had so much access, which is why I think that if you ask me, I was with Doug Burgum in North Dakota, and I think that there's real synergy there. Would not be surprised if he got it. But if you ask me right now, Brian, you got to empty your account and put one person. I think it's Rubio.
Wow. Well, I mean, I know you brought up the facial hair issue with J.D. Vance, which I thought the president's response was pretty interesting. But, that is the thing. Love him or hate him, Trump is absolutely a showman, and he is milking this for every aspect of drama there is. Speaking of drama, I never thought I would see this nor say this in the last 4 years, but yesterday, Politico, the news publication Politico, cited a survey showing Hillary Clinton slightly ahead of Kamala Harris, leading Trump 43% to 41%. The Hill followed up with an article that put Hillary's name first in the headline and noted that she outperformed a slew of other oft-mentioned candidates, including everybody that you mentioned earlier. And you know that Hillary Clinton would crawl over broken glass for an opportunity to be president again. And really, this is the perfect WWE ending to this presidential race, is having a Hillary versus Trump rematch. Can you see any scenario in which this actually happens?
No, she's too old too. And the other thing is she lost, and that would be insane because she will lose again. Nobody wants her. She's totally unlikable. She is not a good campaigner. She can't give a good speech. I remember LeBron James co-hosted something in Cleveland when he was with the Cavaliers, and they could not even fill up the auditorium. Remember that. Remember she lost every battleground state. The only thing stupider than sticking with Joe Biden would be going back to Hillary Clinton, who we all know for sure can't beat Trump. You can hold on to that poll as long as you want. Nobody likes her. And she's not a good politician. She's not a likable person. And her complaining, what if I won, crying, giving the speech she would have made had she won, the dumb book she writes. Please. This would be, I'd be laughing for 3 days if they named her.
So what is your best guess in terms of whether Biden stays or goes at this point, Brian?
Well, I don't know. Everybody, because it's unprecedented. But this is his deal. He's got a big presser today. And this is one of the times that I think on some level the Trump team wants him to do well. And every person on the Democratic side wants him to fail so miserably he can't go on. That's what's at stake. And then he's going to schedule Lester Holt for Monday. So I'm fascinated by this. So he's going to sit there. You got to see his agenda today. This is a big agenda. This is why people say the presidency is really hard. It's great. This is why you do it. This is why you run for it. This is why you raise money for it. But for Joe Biden, he holds a bilateral meeting with Zelensky. You imagine it could be substantive. Can you imagine if that, because what's happening now, evidently we're going to pledge to give F-16s 2 years after we pledged to give F-16s, but now we're going to give it to him. Then he participates in a working session on the NATO summit 1 hour later, and then he participates in an event at the Ukraine Compact, and then he sits down and does a press conference at 5:30. Mm-hmm. Now, he's only going to have 30 minutes where he's at his best. Then he says he gets really bad. So we're going to see what happens after that. Then there's an event after that. So we'll see what happens.
You alluded to the kind of conspiracy to not say anything about this. You mentioned Chuck Todd, George Clooney, and so forth. It does seem like all of the media, all the corporate media, liberal, conservative, New York Times, Politico, The Hill, they are trying to overcorrect at this point and make up for lost time, because it seems like every day there's not one, but there's 100 articles of some aspect of Biden being diminished and some Democrat calling on him to go. I have to think that the media is going to be pivotal in Biden being pushed out of this race. What do you think?
He's not doing the job, and they didn't care because they said Trump is a flawed candidate. If he survives the primary, he won't survive the court cases. And if he does survive the court cases, he'll either run from prison or he'll run so so diminished as a candidate. Remember, they keep saying convicted felon. Meanwhile, that could get reversed in real time because of the immunity from the Supreme Court. So now it looks like he's successfully staved off the cases this year, dealt with the first trial. It's got a sentencing now, wait till September. Then he comes out, looks good, and actually brought the party together. At the same time, Joe Biden gets exposed. He's got to actually do the job. And he gets exposed at that debate, which, in retrospect, I can't believe they even wanted it. It makes no sense. That's a story. But I just wanted to ask you this. Are you comfortable with Hunter Biden as his chief of staff? Because right now, Hunter Biden is seen to the White House acting like a chief of staff. Really? The Fed chair testified yesterday he had no contact with Biden for 2 years. Really? So you're not trying to talk to him about the need to get interest rates down so the people listening to us right now might be able to get that house, maybe sell their house, maybe find out what's happening with prices, the stubborn inflation. You don't have a conversation with Powell. Remember, 3 months without knowing that your defense secretary was in the hospital. Then you have Fox does an analysis. 10 months. President Biden didn't give a TV interview or a solo press conference. 16 months, he didn't give a TV news conference. 30 months, Biden didn't give a solo news conference. So this is not doing the job. We hear the stories. After he arrived from an overseas trip, he's got to rest. And then when he comes back, he's got to rest again. And then he says to DNC governors, don't worry, I figured out I'm working too much. So I'm going to work less and go to bed earlier.
Yeah, it's reassuring.
If that isn't the American spirit turned on its head, I don't know what is.
Brian Kilmeade, really an incredible interview. And I guess you're going to be in Milwaukee next week for the convention, right?
Yeah, we'll still do this. Just call. I might have to do the cell phone because my radio guys don't get out. The show doesn't start till 9. But if you don't mind the cell phone, we can still do this.
Absolutely, that'd be great. Certainly, that's going to be the place to be next week. Brian Kilmeade, check him out on Fox and Friends on his own nationally syndicated radio show, and you can also check him out Saturday nights on Fox News on One Nation. Any idea what you're going to focus on this Saturday, Brian?
Yeah, well, I got something that's a little bit different. I did a celebrity stroll with Tyler Hubbard, who's got his 5th #1, one half of Florida Georgia line. We get the story of that breakup. I did it right here in New York City. We went to his favorite pizza place. And then I'll definitely have the Ruthless podcast guys. I'm going to have all 4 of them on at once. I just want to get inside Washington, what this week has been like. And I'm zeroing in. Marco Rubio and I were exchanging texts, and he said to me, I'll share with you. And I said, Senator, would you be able to do the show? And he says, don't you tape on Fridays? I go, I'm going to tape some of it on Friday. He goes, are you worried by Saturday the interview won't be usable? And I go, what does that mean?
Wow.
So
the next 24
we'll see
hours
what happens.
Could be quite interesting.
Yeah.
Wow, that is...
He goes, either way, it might not be usable. And I go, that's a good point, but I'd like to try. I can work around it. I promise. So I might be live. I have a wedding Saturday, but the van's going to come there. Last week I did the show. It was a special show. I redid the first A block in my driveway. I was away, and I think I'll be outside the wedding in Westchester. I'll end up in a van redoing the first block, looking for the newsmaker, which might be Tom Cotton. I know he's a finalist, but I don't think he's going to get it. So maybe I'll get somebody like him to lead us off.
Brian,
you can't go wrong. We just need insight, right?
Yeah, exactly. Brian Kilmeade, thanks as always. We'll chat next week.
Go get him, Frank.
15 seconds of fame straight ahead.
The Other Side of Midnight. It's The Other Side of Midnight with Frank Morano.
This is The Other Side of Midnight. We're going to give you an opportunity to be heard for 15 seconds at 1-646-720-0635. That's 1-646-720-0635 as part of
The Other Side of Midnight. This is 15 Seconds of Fame.
Mike.
Morning, Frank.
Morning.
No more Sunday scheduled events for you. Rumor is even God rested on Sunday. Make a plan, stick to it. People will understand where they won't.
Cheech.
Yeah, this is Cheech. I'm looking for Chong. Have you seen him around? He's got the big joint in his mouth. I'm looking for him.
David.
Yeah, Brian Kilmeade is telling your audience nonsense. The president does not normally speak to the Fed chair because it's an independent agency. Thank you.
Charles.
During Prohibition, this man by the name of Joshua was caught making alcohol. So he was arrested. During the trial, the judge saw the name was Joshua, and he was in a jocular mood, and he said, "Are you the Joshua that made the sun stand still?" The guy says, "No, I'm the Joshua that made the moon shine."
That's not bad. And finally, Rusty.
Yeah. Didn't you talk abortion? Didn't you talk about abortion and Trump settled that with you go with the state. Is he wrong? Comment on that.
Yes, he is. I hope that comment is sufficient. All right, Frank Morano, good day.